Chapter 475. Eric thought that Zeta Jones would wake up late with a hangover. He didn't expect to see the girl in a pink bathrobe making breakfast in the kitchen. "Good morning, Catherine." Eric sat down in the small dining room that was connected to the kitchen and greeted the figure in the kitchen with a smile. Zeta Jones seemed a little surprised. She looked over and said, "Good morning, Mr. Williams. Is there breakfast for me?" "Of course," Zeta Jones replied. He quickly scooped the fried egg from the frying pan onto a plate and served it to Eric along with the rest of the food he had prepared. Eric thanked her and picked up the cutlery. As he was about to enjoy, he saw that Zeta Jones just sat down next to him. Aware of Eric's doubts, the girl replied, "I don't eat in the morning. This is specially made for you." Eric smiled and divided the breakfast in front of him into 2 portions. He pushed it in front of the girl and said, "You can go and get a glass of milk." Zeta Jones didn't object. She got up and walked to the fridge. She poured a glass of milk and sat down in the same position. "Why were you drunk last night?" Eric asked casually as he spread jam on the bread. Hearing this question, Zeta Jones paused. She glanced at someone who was acting as if nothing had happened and said bitterly, "There was a guy who made trouble at the party and ruined my plan." "Oh, that's a pity. It's not easy to hook up with the president of one of the 7 big Hollywood companies. But I don't think Chong Peters would fall out so easily. What did you do after that?" "I refused his proposal," Zeta Jones said in a low voice, not concealing anything. Eric was stunned at first, then he laughed without caring about his image. "Proposal, haha. You're playing big. You actually managed to hook up with a Hollywood veteran to propose to you." Zeta Jones glanced at Eric. She seemed to have given up on herself. She was just an ordinary girl from a small town in Wales. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was now. "Mr. Williams, are you gloating? I thought you were a gentleman." "How did you know?" Eric stopped laughing and asked. "For example, last night." "So you woke up last night. I thought you were drunk." Eric narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman sitting next to him. The woman in a pink bathrobe exuded a faint feminine fragrance. "You may have misunderstood. It's mainly because you're so drunk that I'm not interested in you. I like women who are half drunk and half awake. These women tend to struggle." Zeta Jones smiled and asked, "The more you struggle, the happier you are." "Bingo," Eric snapped. Although she knew that Eric was joking, Zeta Jones still gave him a look of disdain. Eric completely ignored Zeta Jones's look and asked, "Now that you've lost the golden goose, what are you going to do next?" Zeta Jones gave him a bitter look. "There's one more in front of me. I'm going to try and see if I can get him. If I fail, I'll go back to England and continue to wait." Eric seemed to be numbed by an electric current. He pretended to shiver and said with a frightened look, "I advise you to give up on this idea. Young people like to go to extremes. If you lure someone to the point of proposing to you and then cruelly reject him, it's hard to predict what tragic things will happen. If he really proposes to me, maybe I'll really say yes?" "Don't. You're still young. Once you step into the grave of marriage, you probably won't be able to climb out. It's better to continue to harm the old men in Hollywood. When you step on those old bones and climb to the top of Hollywood's power, I'll write an autobiography for you for free. I've even thought of the title, The Legendary Life of Catherine Zeta Jones. The title is really uncreative, but it's understandable. Hollywood directors often have no talent in screenwriting." Eric gritted his teeth and seemed to rack his brain for a while before saying, "How about My Struggle?" "Mr. Chancellor will be angered to death." Eric sighed and shook his head. "Sigh, women." Zeta Jones looked at Eric's defeated face, and the corners of her mouth curled up into a beautiful arc. However, the charm quickly collapsed. She suddenly wanted to ask Eric if he looked down on her, but she quickly realized that perhaps this young Hollywood tycoon didn't care about her at all. In that case, what was there to look down on? But how could a young man like him understand the hardships she had to go through to get rid of poverty and climb up the ladder cautiously? Feeling that Zeta Jones suddenly quieted down, Eric turned his head and glanced at the woman. He noticed her expression and asked, "What's wrong?" Weren't you fine just now? No. Zeta Jones blinked quickly a few times. Nothing. Oh. Eric didn't ask further and said, Do you want me to get someone to buy you a set of clothes? Zeta Jones shook her head. No need, I'll wear the dress from last night and leave later. Also, thank you for bringing me back last night, Mr. Williams. You're welcome. Zeta Jones finished the breakfast in front of her, took out a tissue and wiped her lips elegantly. Then, she said with determination, If one day, don't forget today's promise. What? Eric was puzzled. About helping me write my autobiography, whether it's the legendary life of Catherine Zeta-Jones or my struggle. In short, when that day comes, I will definitely make you fulfill this promise. Eric noticed the determination on the woman's face when she spoke and nodded with a smile. Okay, but I haven't talked about the fee. I'm very expensive. I'll act in one of your movies for free. After Zeta-Jones made up her mind, she seemed to be more confident. When the time comes, my salary will definitely not be low. Eric pretended to hesitate for a moment before revealing a reluctant expression. Then I'll take a loss and promise you. After Eric finished his breakfast, Zeta-Jones carefully washed the dishes and returned to the bedroom to change into the dress from last night. After the woman came out, Eric said, I'll get the driver to send you? Zeta-Jones didn't reject Eric's kindness. She expressed her gratitude and the two walked out of the mansion side by side. When the woman was about to get into the car, Eric took out a business card and handed it to Zeta-Jones. A good friend's business card. He's an executive at ICM. You can find him and say that I introduced you. Zeta-Jones was a little hesitant. Eric smiled and said, If you mind, I can guarantee that this detail won't appear in your autobiography in the future. Zeta-Jones smiled and took the business card from Eric. She looked at it and saw the name Kapoor sit on it. She vaguely remembered that this was the name of a top agent in Hollywood. Thank you, Mr. Williams. However, you can truthfully write this plot in my autobiography. Okay. Eric nodded and walked forward to open the car door for the woman. Zeta-Jones lifted her skirt and got in. Eric closed the car door and said a few words to the driver. He watched the black BMW leave. Due to the drastic changes in the movie style, Dark War, prequel only earned $40. $3 million in the first week, and the box office showed an obvious downward trend for the entire week. The box office estimated that the box office for Dark War, prequel might drop by more than 60% in the second week, and this was still a conservative estimate. After all, apart from Tornado, which was still going strong, Batman Returns, which Batman fans had been looking forward to for 2 years, would also be released in the second week of Dark War, prequel, which was on June 19th. Under the attack of Tornado and Batman Returns, Dark War, prequel was destined to be the most tragic cannon fodder. Compared to the disappointment of Dark War, prequel, Tornado's box office results in the second week of release surprised many people. Because compared to the first week, Tornado's box office only dropped 15% in the second week, reaching a high of $55 million. It was about $15 million higher than Dark War, prequel's box office in the first week. Given this box office trend, it was very likely that Tornado would once again become a film with a total box office of $300 million in North America. Tornado accumulated $120 million in box office in 2 weeks, which also made Hollywood film companies see the box office potential of CG special effects movies. For a time, in addition to the extremely popular digital field, Industrial Light and Magic also became the target of close contact with several other major film companies. As for those newly established small CG special effects companies in Hollywood, they frequently received merger and acquisition invitations from major film companies. In this case, after a discussion between Eric and Stan Winston, they quickly made a decision to expand the scale of the digital domain. They planned to expand the number of fixed CG special effects artists in the digital domain to 1,000 people. The reason why Eric made this decision was not only because of the large increase in the workload of the digital domain. In addition, there was also the consideration of the MAYA software. If they could train as many as 1,000 special effects artists who were proficient in operating the MAYA software in the digital domain, Then after these people left their jobs in the future, as long as they stayed in the special effects industry, they would definitely play a very important role in promoting the MAYA software. After seeing the importance of CG special effects, other special effects companies began to develop their own special effects software. However, without enough film projects to accumulate technical experience, Eric knew that those software were destined to be unable to surpass MAYA. As long as he chose the right time to commercialize the MAYA software in a few years, it would definitely bring him a lot of wealth. On June 19th, under the close attention of many people and the anticipation of a large number of fans, Warner Brothers once again released the second big Batman movie, Batman Returns, after 2 years. With Dark War, prequel completely declared a flop, most people turned their attention to the box office battle between Batman Returns and Tornado. Although Tornado was already in its third week of release, relying on the heaven-defying box office trend of the first 2 weeks, even if the box office this week maintained a drop of about 20%, the box office of Tornado in the third week would still reach a high of more than $45 million, which was almost the same as the box office of most movies in their first week of release. Just as Eric had expected, although Batman Returns still maintained Tim Burton's dark style, after the audience was stunned by the first film, it was obvious that they could no longer accept the colder style of the second film. Although Batman Returns still earned more than $55 million at the box office in its first week of release, the reviews of the fans were no longer as high as the first film. At the same time, Tornado still received more than $46 million at the box office, with a total box office of $166 million. Comparing the two, this year's box office champion was probably destined to belong to Tornado. In the second week of Batman Returns' release, the box office had dropped by 45%, which was far more than the 20% drop of the first film in the same period. Although the sequel would definitely be able to recoup its costs based on the current box office trend, under the one-sided crusade of the fans, Warner Brothers was already considering changing the director and male lead of the Batman series. Perhaps wanting to maintain his status in the industry, in the second week of Batman Returns' release, the male lead Michael Keaton took the initiative to reveal to the media that he planned to withdraw from the Batman series. However, Warner Brothers did not respond directly to this. Eric soon heard the news. He knew that in the Batman series in the 90s, almost every main creator would make a complete update by the third and fourth film. Therefore, he could understand that Michael Keaton was taking the initiative to find a way out for himself. However, without the halo of the male lead of Batman, Michael Keaton would definitely not have any big development in Hollywood in the future. In 10 or 20 years, when he reminisced about the past, this former superhero would appear in a movie called Birdman to reminisce about the past and try for an Oscar at the same time. However, these were not things that Eric cared about. July was coming, and all the preliminary preparations for Jurassic Park were in place, and filming could start at any time. But after some consideration, Eric decided to wait for another summer release of Firefly before setting off for Kauai, Hawaii, where Jurassic Park was mainly filmed. Chapter 476. The filming of Jurassic Park in Kauai will take about 10 to 12 weeks. During this period, if there are no urgent matters, I will only contact Los Angeles through the phone. I hope everyone can do their jobs well, Eric summarized as he sorted out the information in front of him. The presidents, vice presidents, and department managers in the conference room nodded in agreement. After the meeting was adjourned, Eric stopped the executives of Firefly and Disney as usual. Eric, is there anything else? Jeffrey asked after they followed Eric to his office. It's about Columbia, Eric said. He took out the documents from the filing cabinet and handed them to Jeffrey, Michael Lynn, Katzenberg, and Frank Wales. When it came to Columbia, Jeffrey and the others actually understood what Eric meant. Eric was definitely not going to talk about the cooperation with Columbia, but the division of Columbia's distribution channels. After a few months of operation, not only did Firefly get most of Columbia's distribution resources in South America, but through Peter Guber's layoffs and other measures, the distribution resources in European countries also began to flow into Firefly. Although Columbia could not lay off all the subsidiaries in Europe, the world's second-largest market, it was easy to lay off some of them. In order to hide the real purpose, Firefly only recruited about half of the employees from the subsidiaries that were laid off. The other half who were really laid off could only admit that they were unlucky. After receiving a certain salary increase from Firefly and seeing the plight of the employees who were really laid off, the employees who were recruited by Firefly did not express any dissatisfaction. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. The Japanese gradually realized something was wrong and raised doubts to the Columbia management. However, Peter Guber used his trump card to block them. This trump card was very simple: resignation. In the face of Sony's doubts, Peter Guber personally called Morita Akio and said that if the Sony headquarters did not trust his reform measures, he could submit his resignation to the board of directors. To many people's surprise, this lousy move actually worked. In Eric's opinion, it was unbelievable. Usually, only the company's management who had achieved extraordinary results had the confidence to use the resignation threat card. Peter Guber had been causing huge losses to Columbia for 2 years. If it were Eric, he would have wanted Peter Guber to leave. However, when Sony received Peter Guber's resignation threat, they actually compromised and even replaced a senior executive of Sony's US branch. It's almost done in Europe. I have recently read the information about Asia. After Eric sent the information to them, he leaned on the sofa and said, "In order to suppress the dumping of Hong Kong films, several countries in Southeast Asia have introduced stricter and stricter restrictions in recent years. However, they have relaxed the entry threshold for Hollywood films. This is very good news for us." Although this matter had nothing to do with Sony, Katzenberg still carefully read the information in his hand and said, "Eric, Sony has already noticed this matter. They did not take any measures because of the pressure from various parties. However, I think it's about time. In my opinion, Columbia's distribution channels in Southeast Asia are not much better than ours. Those resources are like chicken ribs. We don't need to test the Japanese's bottom line." "I understand." Eric nodded and smiled. "Look at the last page. I only plan to get Columbia's branch in Asia." The other 4 people turned to the last page of the information. "The mainland of China?" "Yeah." Eric nodded. He did not expect Columbia to have a branch in China. Even Disney only had a nominal office. Firefly had not even contacted them for film cooperation. Michael Lin asked, "Eric, do you think there is potential for development there?" Eric smiled and said, "I can't give you an accurate answer. I only know that there are 17 billion people there." The other 4 people couldn't help but look at each other. As executives of film companies, they certainly knew the situation on the other side of the ocean. The extremely closed market there had been subconsciously ignored by Hollywood. But when they heard Eric say 17 billion people, they couldn't help but feel a little moved. If a country with such a huge population base could open up the film market, what would happen? "I think we can give it a try." Katzenberg was the first to speak. "They have been trying to open up the market. This is the best time to lay out the plan in advance. And even if we fail, we won't lose anything." "Then what should we do?" Jeffrey asked, also a little moved. "First, we'll take over Columbia's branch there and establish contact. Then, we'll try to get a share of the profits. If that doesn't work, we can get the right to release it in theaters there. Tornado is very suitable. This movie doesn't have any inappropriate plot, nor is it biased. In short, what we need to do is to cultivate the market. This doesn't require us to spend much effort, but it will definitely bring us unexpected results," Eric said with a smile. After discussing for half an hour and working out some details of the implementation, they got off work together. "Are you going to the premiere of Stranger in Disguise later?" Jeffrey asked as the 2 stood in the elevator together. Eric nodded and said with a smile, "I have to go. That girl has been nagging me for a few days. Otherwise, I would be in Hawaii now. I've seen the sample of Stranger in Disguise. How should I put it? This movie is a little too noisy and a little brainless. It's very strange," Jeffrey commented as he recalled. "This is not a movie for an audience of your age," Eric said with a smile. "And you're talking about the style of Stranger in Disguise. I plan to make a movie like this from the beginning. Also, the biggest highlight of this movie is Jim Carrey's performance. Then how much do you think we can get at the box office this time? Jeffrey asked the question he was most concerned about. Eric thought for a while and said, 100 million shouldn't be a problem. If there is no competition from Tornado and Batman Returns, it should be higher. Jeffrey opened his mouth but did not say his estimate. He shook his head and said with a smile, I really don't know where you get your confidence from. $100 million is already quite high. As the two chatted, Jeffrey rejected Eric's invitation to attend the premiere of Stranger in Disguise and drove away alone. Eric also got into his car and drove to the China Grand Theater where the premiere was held. At 5 o'clock, the bell finally rang. Brittany, who had been in a daze with her chin resting on her hand, immediately perked up. She packed her bag and left the classroom with the crowd. Although she was a child star on the Disney Channel, Brittany and the other actors still had to go to school. Also, in order to deal with the Actors Association and the Protection of Minors Act, Disney had to arrange regular tutoring for their actors. For Brittany, who loved to play, all of this was torture. After leaving the school building, Brittany was about to take her bicycle home when Christina ran over from the other direction. When Christina got close, Brittany asked with a smile, What's the matter, Christina? Christina took out 2 tickets from her uniform pocket with a smile. Tickets to the premiere of Stranger in Disguise. Drew gave them to me. Do you want to go? Brittany's smile faded a little. She stared at the tickets in Christina's hand and said, Drew gave them to you. Why didn't I know? Christina's smile didn't change, but she was a little smug when she saw Brittany's expression. If Drew hadn't specifically told her that the tickets were for the two of them, Christina wouldn't even have told Brittany, the little fool, about it. Are you going or not? If not, I'll call my other friends. Christina had no intention of explaining. Although Drew had said that the tickets were for the two of them, if Brittany didn't want to go, what could she do? Brittany looked at the smug look on Christina's face and wanted to reject her impulsively. But after thinking about it, she said, All right, but I have to call home first. How troublesome. Christina pouted and said, Then hurry up. Oh, and if we meet Drew, we might be able to attend the party after the premiere. You'd better tell your mother. Maybe Drew will invite us to stay at his house tonight. Brittany thought of the spacious room, game room, and swimming pool in the Beverly Hills mansion and compared it to her small bedroom. She immediately got excited. After Brittany called home, she was about to walk to her bicycle when Christina pulled her back. You're not going to ride there, are you? What else can I do? Brittany blinked. Don't embarrass yourself. Come with me. Christina pulled Brittany out of the small door and pointed at a taxi not far away. Of course we're taking a taxi. It's my treat. Brittany was unhappy with Christina's smug look and said, You don't have to treat. We'll split the bill. Up to you. Christina walked up and greeted the driver. She opened the door to the passenger seat and got in. Brittany pouted but had no choice but to sit in the back seat unwillingly. The two girls got out of the car together and saw the long red carpet in front of the China Grand Theater. There were also celebrities who were being photographed on the red carpet. Brittany looked at the exquisite white gown of the female celebrity on the red carpet and said enviously, So beautiful. These are just the small celebrities that Firefly invited to warm up the atmosphere. The big ones are behind them, Christina said, looking like a little know-it-all. Brittany didn't want to be looked down upon by Christina. She quickly put away her envious expression and looked around. She couldn't help but ask softly, Hey, do you think we'll be able to see Mr. Williams tonight? Who knows? Christina shook her head and stood on her tiptoes to look at the end of the red carpet. But the possibility of Mr. Williams attending the premiere is very high. He's with Drew and... Christina immediately shut her mouth. She didn't want to share the little secret that she had observed with Brittany. However, Brittany didn't ask her about it. She continued, Have you seen Tornado? It's amazing. I want to watch it a few more times. Too bad I don't have that much pocket money. If we can go to Sharp Corner Manor again, we'll definitely be able to watch it as many times as we want in the private screening room, Christina said. Then let's beg Drew to bring us there again, okay? Brittany said innocently. Christina glanced at the silly girl beside her in disdain and didn't answer. However, she was looking forward to it. However, Drew didn't bring them there, and Christina was smart enough not to ask. In her eyes, Drew was much smarter than the silly girl beside her. It was hard for her to guess what Drew was thinking. Brittany, on the other hand, could guess what he was going to do just by looking at his expression. The two girls didn't enter the screening room in advance. Instead, they stayed near the red carpet like the other fans and counted the stars excitedly. "Look, it's Mr. Williams and Drew." When the premiere was about to start, Brittany's sharp eyes saw two figures coming out of the limousine at the end of the red carpet. When Drew held Eric's arm and slowly walked to them, Brittany immediately waved her little hand and greeted them. Eric waved at the crowd, and easily saw the two little girls. He even winked at the two little girls. Stranger in Disguise was a PG-13 movie, which meant that it was meant for parents. Although it was recommended that parents watch it, it wasn't as restrictive as R-rated movies. Therefore, it wasn't strange for the two girls to show up at the premiere. After walking through the red carpet and into the theater, Eric asked, "I see Boo and Chris. Did you invite them?" Drew pouted in dissatisfaction and snorted, "Boo, you call me so affectionately." Eric had just subconsciously used a more familiar name. Looking at the girl's unhappy expression, he raised his hand with a smile and patted her head. "Ah, my hairstyle." Drew hurriedly slapped Eric's hand away. "Little girl, what hairstyle do you want?" Chapter 477. Although there was an endless stream of Jim Carrey's high box office movies in his memory, the most classic work of Jim Carrey was The Disguised Monster. The depressed bank employee, Stan, accidentally picked up a mask that could give people superpowers, which caused a series of storms. Of course, the ending was that the good guys defeated the bad guys, and the lovers became a couple. Although the plot was quite mediocre, Jim Carrey's crazy performance made the audience at the premiere laugh from time to time. Eric stared at the picture on the big screen and listened to the laughter of the audience in the theater from time to time. He couldn't help but think that if it weren't for the rise of Hollywood special effects blockbusters, perhaps Jim Carrey would have achieved the same status as Stephen Chow in Hollywood in the 1990s. Of course, this was just a thought. If a movie market could only accommodate one star, then there must be a big problem with the movie market. "What are you thinking about?" Elizabeth suddenly asked in a low voice. "Something," Eric answered vaguely, then changed the topic. "How are the preparations for Detective Airplane going?" Elizabeth was obviously a little dissatisfied with Eric's change of topic. She said perfunctorily, "It's okay, it won't affect the schedule." Eric smiled and reached out to pat the girl's leg. "Liz, don't be like this. You know, I'll definitely tell you what I can." Elizabeth looked around in a panic. After confirming that no one was looking, she pushed Eric's hand away from her leg. "Why can't I know something else?" Of course, he could not tell anyone about his future memories. Eric said, "Everyone should have some privacy." Westerners usually attached great importance to privacy, even between the most intimate of couples. Therefore, when she heard this, the gloominess in Elizabeth's heart dissipated a lot. She snorted softly and asked, "Hey, how much do you think the box office of Disguised Hero will get?" Eric pointed behind him and said, looking at the reaction of the audience, 100 million should not be a problem. Most of the audience who could attend the premiere were veteran movie fans who were specially invited by the movie company. If the movie had a good reaction among these people, its reputation among ordinary movie audiences would definitely not be bad. However, Elizabeth was not satisfied. "It's only 100 million. The North American box office for Tornado is estimated to be 300 million. Now, the overseas box office has already reached 50 million. The total overseas box office will probably not be much lower than the North American box office. Then you have to look at the difference in cost between the two movies. The cost of Tornado is 70 million, while Stranger in Disguise is less than 30 million. Elizabeth frowned. "Something feels different. If you're really interested, you can try to make a big-budget movie in 2 years. But don't cry if you fail." I'll give it a try. Eric smiled and said, let me make it clear, Firefly will not invest. Humph, you're biased. You're really enthusiastic to invest in a documentary that a woman has no chance of making money. Eric knew that Elizabeth must be talking about the documentary about the Los Angeles riots that Catherine Bigelow was preparing. Because she needed a lot of material, Eric helped Catherine contact the Fox News network, which had accumulated a lot of news about the riots. It was not surprising that Elizabeth knew about it. Eric had heard women scolding him for being biased more than once. However, he also knew that most of these women had a little temper and were acting coquettishly. He had never mistreated any of his women. Thinking of Fox, Eric suddenly thought of another thing. Speaking of which, I suddenly thought of a movie that Fox will release at the end of the month. I think it's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What's wrong? Eric leaned over slightly and smirked. How about selling the copyright of this movie to Firefly? Name the price. In his memory, Buffy the Vampire Slayer should have been filmed for about 7 seasons. A TV series that could film for 7 seasons was definitely a classic among classics. Eric did not expect that the movie version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was broadcast in 1997 in the original spacetime, would appear as early as 1992. When Elizabeth saw Eric's expression, she immediately raised her vigilance. She subconsciously thought of the film copyright of Golden Jade League that Eric once got from Fox. Firefly only spent a few million on the film copyright, but because of Sleepless in Seattle, the old film became popular and the videotape of Golden Jade League sold more than 2 million boxes, and Firefly also made tens of millions. Thinking of this, Elizabeth decisively refused. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Okay. Eric shrugged and sat up straight. A moment later, Elizabeth couldn't help but be curious. She asked, Hey, what do you want to do? Sell the copyright to me first, then I'll tell you, Eric said with a smile. Humph, if you don't want to tell me, then I won't tell you. I'll tell Fox later. I won't give you the copyright of this movie even if it's ruined. Then let's keep it for now, Eric said. Anyway, even if they really got the adaptation rights of this movie immediately, Firefly did not have any plans to produce more TV series for the time being. This year, in addition to several major blockbusters, Firefly had a total of 5 or 6 small and medium productions. In addition to the TV shows Friends, the company was completely operating at full capacity. Perhaps in a few years, when Firefly had its own TV station, he would find a way to get it. Thinking of the TV station, Eric's thoughts deviated a lot. Now, the 3 major TV stations were in a state of independent operation. They had not yet merged with any of the big 6, so it was a good time to acquire them. However, Eric knew that after the new century, the 3 major public TV stations were not in a good situation. The prosperity of the internet was one of the reasons, but more importantly, the rise of cable TV stations. Therefore, he had been thinking about whether Firefly should focus on developing cable TV stations or acquire one of the 3 major TV stations. Seeing that Eric was scared out of his wits again, Elizabeth kicked him with her leg before turning to the big screen. Unknowingly, the disguised genius had already come to an end. Stan and Tina stood side by side on the bridge, threw the magic mask into the river, and hugged their loved ones. When the crowd applauded, Eric said to Elizabeth, I won't participate in the party later, you host it. No, Eric, it's only 10 o'clock. Before Elizabeth answered, Drew's voice sounded from the other side. Most of the people who attended the party after the premiere were the main cast and some guests who were specially invited to the premiere. There were no important people to deal with, so Eric was too lazy to join in the fun. I have something to do tomorrow, you guys have fun. Eric patted the girl's shoulder comfortingly. After a simple curtain call ceremony, just as Eric was about to leave from the backstage, Drew came up with a little dress, followed by 2 little tails. Hi, Boo-Boo, Chris. Eric greeted the 2 girls. Seeing that Brittany was not only wearing her school uniform, but also carrying a small school bag, he asked curiously, Isn't it summer vacation now? Do you still have school? I have remedial classes, Mr. Williams, Brittany replied timidly when she heard Eric talking to her. Although American schools did not have the tradition of remedial classes during summer vacation, there were exceptions to everything. Brittany and Christina were both small-time Disney actors, so they must have missed a lot of homework, so it was normal for them to attend remedial classes during summer vacation. Although he realized what was going on, Eric still teased with a smile, "I heard that those who attend remedial classes during summer vacation are not good students." Brittany opened her little mouth and suddenly had an idea. She pointed at Christina beside her and said, "Chris is attending remedial classes too." Eric almost laughed out loud. The little girl obviously did not hear his teasing. He glanced at Christina, who was wearing a beautiful light blue dress and did not look like she had just come out of school. He could not help but reach out and rub the girl's little head. "She doesn't look like a good student at all." Christina, of course, could tell that Eric was teasing them. She was neither flustered nor angry. She stuck out her little tongue cutely and did not mind that Eric ruffled her hair. She shrunk her neck slightly and squinted her slender eyes slightly like a cute kitten. Seeing Christina's expression, Eric suddenly had a sense of déjà vu. He inadvertently glanced at Drew beside him and realized that Christina was obviously imitating Drew. Sigh, they were all little vixens. "It's already so late, you should go back. I'll get someone to send you guys back." Huh? The one who spoke was the innocent Brittany. She had thought that Drew would bring them back to his mansion in Beverly Hills tonight. Hearing Brittany's confusion, Eric looked at Drew and asked, "What's wrong?" Drew hugged the two little girls and said with a smile, "I'm bringing them back to my place." "Eric, do you want to come?" Eric quickly shook his head. "Forget it. In that case, let's go back as soon as possible. Don't stay out too late. Don't forget to send them to class tomorrow." "Got it. You're nagging like an old man." Eric reached out and knocked the girl's head. "Speaking of which, I haven't settled the score with you for teaching little Emma the wrong way." "Hee, I heard about it. Julia said that you embarrassed yourself." As they chatted, they came to the parking lot together. Drew used the excuse that he didn't drive to get into Eric's car with the two little girls. There were two bodyguards in the front seat, so Eric had to squeeze in the back seat with the three little girls. They squeezed all the way to the entrance of Drew's mansion. Eric didn't get out of the car. Instead, he chased the three little girls out of the car. After a simple goodbye, he told the driver to drive home. It wasn't until Eric's SUV disappeared that the three girls entered Drew's mansion. Brittany was carefree and happy, but Christina was a little disappointed that Eric didn't stay the night. The girl had always hoped that she could spend more time with Eric. Being able to please this big shot in Hollywood was much better than simply staying the night. "Did you learn it well?" Drew reached out and put his arm around Christina's little shoulder as they walked along the corridor of the mansion. "Huh? What?" Christina wanted to play dumb. Drew reached out and pinched the girl's cheek. "He's praising you. You learned it well." Christina knew that she was caught imitating Drew's cute expression. She didn't know if Drew was really praising her, so she nervously twitched the corner of her mouth and showed a fawning smile. "I just think that looks good. And Eric likes it too," Drew added with a smile. This time, Christina didn't answer. Brittany, on the other hand, had an adorable look on her face. She had no idea what the two were talking about. Drew didn't intend to enlighten this silly girl. In fact, being a little stupid had its benefits. It would be boring if he raised two identical Lolas. Tina Fey didn't hear the sound of the car in the courtyard. She was startled when she heard the door open. She was relieved when she noticed that it was Drew who came in with the two girls. She didn't go to the premiere with Drew. Instead, she stayed at home. Tina Fey wasn't surprised to see Drew come back with the two girls. She always thought that Drew was still a child when he interacted with the two girls. "Why are you guys back? Isn't there a party?" Tina Fey stood up from the sofa and asked curiously. Drew leaned lazily on the sofa and waved his little hand. "This kind of party is boring. Plus, Eric left early. It's even more boring, so I came back in his car." "Eric, he's here too?" Tina Fey glanced outside the door. "Don't look. He's already gone, Drew said with a teasing tone. Help me get a glass of juice. I'm thirsty. Let me. Christina, who had already sat down, stood up politely and walked to the fridge. Tina Fey looked at the girl's action and shook her head slightly. She sat back on the sofa and casually picked up the documents she was reading and placed them on her knees. It's already so late. You're still reading these things? Drew came over and glanced at the documents in front of Tina Fey with a smile. I don't have anything else to do anyway, Tina Fey said casually. She didn't really like watching TV. Plus, Drew gave her a high salary, so Tina Fey subconsciously worked very hard. Sigh. Tina. The more you do, the lazier I'll be. I'm really scared that you'll quit one day. What should I do then? Drew leaned beside Tina Fey and reached out his little arm to hug the girl's waist. He rubbed his head against her as he said. Tina Fey smiled and shook her slim waist. She smiled and said, You're giving me such a high salary. I can't bear to quit. You still can't bear to leave Eric, right? Drew immediately teased her. Tina Fey blushed and her gaze drifted away. Tina, do you want that ring? Drew suddenly asked. Ah. Tina Fey almost threw the documents in her hand away when she heard the question. Chapter 478. The Disguised Stranger earned more than $37 million at the box office in its first week, far exceeding its production cost of less than $30 million. There was almost no doubt that the total box office would exceed $100 million. Compared to MGM, which only released one movie during the summer and earned less than $10 million at the box office, TG's results would definitely attract the attention of many people. After all, TG's box office results during the summer of 1992 were much better than Paramount, Universal, and Fox, even if they were not compared to MGM, which was already in shambles. Paramount's summer release was Harrison Ford's action movie, Patriot Games, but the movie only earned about $80 million at the box office. Universal and Fox were in a similar situation. None of the three major studios had a movie that exceeded $100 million at the box office during the summer. As for the rich Sony Pictures, although they invited Tom Cruise to produce Dark War, the prequel, due to various reasons, the total box office of the movie stopped at around $80 million, barely reaching the budget of the movie. The impact of the failure in the North American box office market was often a series of effects. Because the box office of Dark War, the prequel, was not ideal, the overseas box office and the peripheral sales would be greatly affected. This project would once again bring a huge loss to Sony Pictures. A week after the release of The Disguised Stranger, Disney's Even Nuns Go Crazy stepped on the tail end of the summer and appeared in more than 2,100 theaters in North America. The release of this comedy almost signaled the end of the summer. The movies that were released after that were not very important to the studio, but they wanted to try their luck at the end of the summer. The probability of a dark horse appearing in these movies was very small. There was no doubt that Tornado was the biggest winner of the entire summer. With an estimated total box office of $300 million and The Disguised Genius that followed, the total box office of Firefly during the summer would exceed $400 million. If a few Disney films were included, then according to the current annual box office in North America, the box office of Firefly Pictures would have exceeded 10% of the annual box office in just one summer. If Firefly was a listed company, perhaps the stock price would have risen by a lot. However, while the North American entertainment media was talking about it, Eric had already left Los Angeles. After attending the premiere of Stranger in Disguise, he quickly flew to Hawaii. Thanks to Jerry Bruckheimer's excellent work, by the time Eric arrived in Hawaii, Dr. Hardman's experimental base, the Jurassic Park gate, and the electric fence blocking the dinosaurs had all been completed. At the same time, two other small film crews were shooting the corresponding amber and dinosaur archaeological scenes at the Amber Mine in the Dominican Republic and the Red Rock Canyon National Park in California. Eric, look, it's here. Jerry Bruckheimer pointed at a deep forest passage. Kauai doesn't have the kind of terrain you need, but this place definitely fits the bill. We only need to spend a day to transport the necessary equipment and we can start shooting. At this time, The two were discussing the scene where the Tyrannosaurus Rex chased after the Jeep. Since Kauai did not have a convenient terrain, Jerry Bruckheimer found the corresponding scene on Oahu, which was also part of the Hawaiian Islands. If we choose this place, we definitely need to make some changes to the surrounding environment. Otherwise, we won't be able to shoot at all. Will the state of Hawaii agree? Eric looked at the very primitive forest environment in front of him and asked doubtfully. I've already considered this. They said it's not a problem. Jerry Bruckheimer showed Eric a confident expression. Eric smiled and did not ask any more questions. The two got into a Jeep together. After the driver started the engine, Eric stretched. Although they had only arrived in Hawaii yesterday, he and Jerry Bruckheimer had already visited all the shooting locations today. They would have to do some preliminary test shooting tomorrow. Shooting a big-budget movie was like fighting a war in ancient times. It was very labor-intensive and resource-intensive. Therefore, Eric could not spare too much time to rest. The daily expenses of a production team of hundreds of people were huge. Eric had no choice but to get back to work as soon as possible. With Eric's wealth, he could definitely afford to waste time. However, if he really did that, he would no longer be a qualified director and producer. After the Jeep arrived at the port of Oahu, the two boarded a small yacht and returned to Kauai. It was already evening. After a day of work, they could finally relax. Looking at the beautiful island behind them under the sunset, Jerry Bruckheimer smiled and said to Eric, "Eric, maybe you can try buying a small island." "Do you have a private island?" Eric asked curiously. The trend of buying private islands was now popular, but Eric was not very interested in it. Jerry Bruckheimer shook his head and said, "Not yet, but I think about it occasionally." As a gold medal producer who had been famous for more than 10 years, Jerry Bruckheimer's net worth was no less than that of an A-list Hollywood star. Therefore, buying a private island was not a financial problem. "Actually, I don't think it's worth buying a small island at all. If it's too close to land, privacy is often not guaranteed. If it's too far away from land, it's isolated in the sea. Then, the infrastructure will be a big problem. Unless you invest regardless of the cost, you can't live too comfortably on the island." When Jerry Bruckheimer heard Eric's words, he had a thoughtful look on his face. Eric continued, "If it were me, I'd rather buy a mountain. When the time comes, I'll bring my friends to the foot of a towering mountain, point at the clouds and say, 'Look, this mountain is mine.'" Jerry Bruckheimer could not help but laugh as he imagined the scene described by Eric. After the yacht gradually left Oahu, Jerry Bruckheimer looked at the group of assistants on the deck and winked at Eric. The two of them went into the cabin. "Eric, according to the current box office trend of several movies, the box office of Firefly Pictures should be able to exceed $500 million this summer, right?" Eric knew that Jerry Bruckheimer would not say this for no reason. He nodded silently and sat down with Jerry on the seat near the window. "I've seen the movie release schedule of Firefly and Disney. At the end of the year, Firefly will release Speed, Detective Airplane, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is a collaboration with Sony. Disney will also release another animated film. The box office of animated films has always been very stable. Therefore, the box office number at the end of the year will not be much worse than that of the summer. Coupled with the box office accumulation of small and medium-sized productions in the non-popular schedule, Firefly Pictures' box office share this year is likely to far exceed Warner's, reaching 30%. Eric had almost understood the meaning of Jerry Bruckheimer's words. He asked with a smile, "Jerry, did someone ask you to pass on a message?" Jerry Bruckheimer nodded. "Mr. Martin Davis from Paramount. As you know, I have always worked with Paramount. What does he want?" Eric asked bluntly. Jerry Bruckheimer smiled and said, "If you agree, Mr. Davis will come to meet you in person. As for what you want to talk about, it's not my concern." "Well, I'll call Mr. Davis when I have time," Eric nodded and said. Jerry Bruckheimer's meaning was obvious. Firefly's movie performance was too outstanding, and it would definitely cause a backlash from several other film companies. Martin Davis asked Jerry Bruckheimer to pass on a message at this time, undoubtedly because he wanted to cooperate with Firefly. After all, few people would actively choose to be hostile when there was a win-win situation. Eric, as far as I'm concerned, I actually think you can separate Pixar Animation Studio and Digital Domain from the Firefly system and set up two separate companies. Eric smiled and shook his head. Jerry, I finally condensed Firefly into a whole. How can I take the initiative to remove the limbs? Jerry Bruckheimer was stunned. He seemed to think that Eric's words made sense, but he felt that something was not quite right. Eric did not look at Jerry Bruckheimer's expression. He turned his head to look at the sea outside the window and said faintly, "Since the rise of the giants in the 20s and 30s, Hollywood has been accustomed to the structure of the 6, 7, or 8 giants, but it does not mean that this should be the norm in Hollywood. In the United States, General Motors can be the dominant company, Bell can be the dominant company, ExxonMobil can be the dominant company, and even Walmart, which has only been established for 30 years, can be the dominant company. In this case, why can't Hollywood be the dominant company?" When Jerry Bruckheimer heard this, he faintly felt a slight shattering sound. He had joined Hollywood since the early 70s, and it had been nearly 20 years since then. Unconsciously, he had become accustomed to the coexistence of several giants in Hollywood. However, Eric's words made Jerry Bruckheimer realize that this rule was not unbreakable. Eric, then why has Hollywood always maintained this coexistence of several giants? Jerry Bruckheimer asked almost subconsciously. Eric thought for a moment and said, "Probably because of the ups and downs in performance. Movies are different from other industries. For example, Walmart has developed a distribution system that is ahead of its peers, so it has dominated the entire United States in just 30 years. When Walmart has already occupied the market, other competitors, even if they completely imitate Walmart's model, can't reach Walmart's scale. But movie companies are different. The measure of a movie company's strength is ultimately the box office, and the box office is the most unstable thing. Maybe a movie company will produce several hit movies in a certain period of time, just like when Barry Diller took over Paramount. But for various reasons, that situation will certainly not last long. Other movie companies are not idle either. Maybe they will produce movies with high box office from time to time. In this way, it is difficult to reach the situation where one company is the dominant company." After saying this, Eric smiled confidently and said, "But at Firefly, this situation will definitely continue. So, one day I will let them get used to something." Jerry Bruckheimer smiled but did not agree with Eric. Since the performance of other movie companies would fluctuate, how could Firefly not appear? Eric did not take what Martin Davis of Paramount told him through Jerry Bruckheimer too seriously. Firefly had now developed to a quite stable state of mind. Such a big movie company could not be defeated by dishonest means. If you wanted to defeat a movie company, you could only rely on movies. But when it came to movies, Eric was confident that no movie company in Hollywood had the strength to do so. However, he did not ignore Martin Davis's message. That night, Eric called Martin Davis, who was far away in Los Angeles, and agreed to have a chat. As for whether they could reach a cooperation, it depended on Paramount's sincerity. Eric knew that when MGM was ignored, Disney was annexed by Firefly, and Universal and Columbia were acquired by the Japanese consortium, the only choice for outsiders to enter Hollywood was to acquire Paramount. According to the memory of his previous life and some information collected before, after Lei Sherdong of Viacom failed to compete with Eric for Disney, he directly shifted his target to Paramount. Barry Diller left Fox and started his own business for a period of time. He soon thought of returning to Hollywood. He joined forces with several companies and began to sound out Paramount's shareholders. Although Paramount's performance in recent years was not very good, with such a shell, Paramount could rise again at any time as long as it could pull in high-quality film projects. Therefore, Martin Davis did not have much intention to sell Paramount. Unfortunately, Paramount was a listed company. Although Martin Davis was the company's largest shareholder, if other movie companies adopted a hostile takeover to annex Paramount, the other shareholders of Paramount were likely to agree to the other party's high-priced acquisition and choose to cash out at a high price if Paramount's performance was not ideal. This was probably why Martin Davis suddenly contacted Eric. When the Japanese acquired Columbia and Universal, The two movie companies had a short cooperation with Firefly and achieved good results. Although the two companies were sold in the end, the Japanese spent a lot of dollars. Martin Davis's thoughts were very clear. He just wanted to improve Paramount's performance and prevent other shareholders from choosing to sell the company. With the Eastern European film market gradually opening up and the annual box office in North America continuing to increase, it was understandable that Martin Davis did not want to sell Paramount. Chapter 479. Once they started working, time flew by. The residents of Lidi, the largest city on Kauai, had seen hundreds of Jurassic Park crew members head to the canyon to film every morning as if they were going to work. News of the filming of Jurassic Park had already appeared on the media. As a highly anticipated movie, people were curious about how Eric would resurrect the dinosaurs from ancient times. When there was demand, there would naturally be people willing to work for it. Other than the crew of Jurassic Park, there were also paparazzi from all over the world on Kauai. They used every means possible to find out the secrets of the crew. In order to prevent information from leaking out, the crew had to take very strict security measures. This was especially true for the dinosaur models. If the photos of these models were leaked out before the movie was released, it would be a disaster for the movie. After all, the selling point of Jurassic Park was the realistic dinosaurs. If the audience saw the dinosaurs in the movie and suddenly thought of the dinosaur models exposed in a magazine, the experience would be greatly reduced. Therefore, even the crew members couldn't see the dinosaur model all the time. These props would only appear on the set when they were shooting relevant scenes. Moreover, once the shooting was completed, the model would be quickly escorted to the tightly guarded warehouse by specialized personnel. When the main crew on Kauai started shooting, the two main actors, Alan Grant and Ellie Settler, were still shooting the archaeological scene in California's Red Rock Canyon National Park. The actor who played John Hammond's lawyer was also shooting the amber mine scene in the Dominican Republic. Only the two small actors and a few other supporting actors appeared on set. Jurassic Park was a movie with multiple narratives. Therefore, this situation did not affect the operation of the crew at all. Eric just happened to be able to shoot some secondary scenes to familiarize himself with the crew. A week later, when the main actors and actresses appeared on Kauai, Eric had already completed the scene at the beginning of the movie where the workers had an accident while transporting the velociraptors and most of the scenes with the fat software engineer, Dennis. Inside the dinosaur base built in the canyon, Eric looked at the frightened bull that was still kicking wildly on the field, as well as the few staff members who were surrounding it, and turned to the assistant director in charge of the props arrangement. "Royce, what's going on? Didn't you say there would be no problem?" Royce didn't have the mood to watch the show like the other staff members. He said with a bitter face, "Eric, this bull is usually very docile. Although it's a bull, it's been whipped. It won't have any problems with a few whips. I think it might be afraid of heights." As Reyes spoke, he pointed at the crane nearby. They were currently filming a scene where they were feeding the velociraptors. A live bull would be hoisted into the velociraptor's nest by the crane. However, after the originally docile bull was hoisted into the air by the crane, it began to struggle violently. Its strength was so great that the crane's mechanical arm kept shaking. Even if the camera managed to capture the situation, it would not be able to use it. Eric had no choice but to order the driver to put the bull down. However, after landing, the agitated bull still did not calm down. It dragged the steel wire around its body and almost hurt someone. As the two of them spoke, a crew member with a tranquilizer gun appeared outside the set. After receiving the order, he shot the mad bull and knocked it out. The other crew members stepped forward and dragged the bull out. Eric rubbed his forehead in distress. Animal actors were indeed a big problem for any crew. Fortunately, the dinosaur props were not alive. "Reyes, I don't care what method you use. Tomorrow, or at the latest, the day after tomorrow, find me a bull that's not afraid of heights." Although this simple feeding scene would only appear for a few seconds in the movie, it had taken more than 2 hours of preparation from the beginning until now. In the end, this was the result. Of course, Reyes could see Eric's frustration. He did not dare to bargain and nodded in agreement. However, Eric had already taken the loudspeaker from his assistant. Okay, let's skip this scene first. We'll film the next scene directly. Nickel, hurry up and set up the cameras. Everyone else, get moving. Hearing the director's roar, the crew who were still reminiscing about the interesting incident quickly came to their senses and walked to their positions. Eric also picked up the script and walked towards the main cast. I'm really sorry. It looks like we'll have to film the next scene directly. Are you sure there's no problem here? Eric walked to Sam Neill and the others and asked. Sam Neill, Helen Hunt and the others smiled and gathered around, nodding to show that there was no problem. Eric did not participate in the activities of actors rehearsing their lines. He only needed to see the final result. Seeing everyone nod, he continued, the next scene will be a group scene. The 5 of you will appear in the camera. In order to help you get into character, the corresponding dinosaur sound effects will be played. I hope that everyone will be able to express the emotions that their characters should have. Although a certain Sundra acrophobia cow had caused some small accidents, even the most outstanding crew would have some small accidents from time to time, so everyone was used to it. After skipping the feeding scene, Nickel Frank, who was the director of photography, quickly arranged the next few scenes for the next scene. Photography, okay. Lighting, okay. Recording, okay. After some time, the people in charge of each group responded through the walkie-talkie. Only then did Eric announce that the filming would continue. This was the scene of the 5 main adult actors watching the base feeding the velociraptors. At this time, it had not been long since Dr. Grant and the others saw the resurrection of the dinosaurs. However, everyone's feelings were different. As a dinosaur archaeologist, Dr. Grant was still in a state of excitement. From time to time, he would ask John Hammond and the administrator, Robert Muldoon, all kinds of questions, showing a strong desire for knowledge. After seeing the feeding process of the dinosaurs, Dr. Ellie Settler showed a woman's unique emotions. The excitement of seeing the dinosaurs disappeared by a lot. The chaos scientist, Ian Malcolm, had been a little worried since the moment he saw the resurrection of the dinosaurs. After watching the velociraptors eat, his worries became more serious. John Hammond was in a state of complacency while observing everyone's reactions. Lawyer Donald was thinking about how to commercialize Jurassic Park. Although everyone's thoughts were different, it was not easy to perform perfectly. However, considering that the audience's attention would often be on the speaker, Eric paid attention to the speaker. If the speaker's performance was impeccable, and the others were above the standard, then the scene would pass. Even so, a few minutes of conversation still used up more than an hour of the remaining time in the morning. After lunch, while the actors were in good condition, the crew immediately moved to another set. Pay attention to Royce. If we find a suitable cow tomorrow, arrange for the morning scene to be res hot. If we can't find one, then shoot according to the original schedule. Also, pay attention to the recent weather conditions and be ready to arrange for a rainy chase scene. I don't want to see all kinds of problems when it rains when we want to start shooting. After a day of work, Eric held a bottle of mineral water in his hand and walked quickly to the director's assistant to take note of things. The two walked all the way to the side of a jeep. The driver opened the door for Eric. Eric finished the water in his hand and stuffed the empty bottle into a roadside trash can before getting into the jeep. In the back seat, Alan, who was sitting on the other side, had already opened the folder on his lap. On set, Eric was a director, but most of the time, after work, Eric had to change to another identity. The jeep drove smoothly on the road. Alan did not waste any time and directly started his work. The budget for the new season of Friends, The X-Files, and Who Will Be a Millionaire has been prepared. There's also the publicity budget for the next half of the year for Firefly and Disney. These documents need your signature as soon as possible. Eric nodded. The opening of Disneyland in Paris is scheduled for September 10th. They hope that you can attend the opening in person and have already sent an invitation. September 10th? What kind of date is that? Eric was puzzled. Alan explained. Disney also raised objections. September 10th, the summer vacation just passed, and it happened to be the off-season for tourism. However, This is the arrangement of the French partners. The whole of Europe is against the opening of Disneyland in Paris. They must have chosen this date because of the pressure of public opinion. Eric's index finger lightly scratched his thigh a few times. The shooting of Jurassic Park would take at least 10 weeks. If everything went well, he might be able to make it to Paris on September 10th. It depends on the situation. If I can attend, I will rush over. Otherwise, forget it. Alan quickly wrote down a few words on the memo, then continued, "One more thing. Fox is responsible for the overseas distribution of Stranger in Disguise. Currently, the movie is only showing in 7 European countries. It hasn't covered the 5 main countries, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. However, its total box office has accumulated more than $40 million. The marketing department sent over a report that the movie's overseas box office may exceed $200 million, which is almost twice the domestic box office." Alan looked at Eric and didn't continue. This was enough to clearly convey the management's intention. Eric shook his head and smiled. "Firefly is responsible for the domestic distribution, and Fox is responsible for the overseas distribution. When TG was established, I agreed with Liz to tell them not to think about it. Moreover, Stranger in Disguise is just an accident. Most local comedies with such a strong style won't achieve good results overseas." Alan opened his mouth but didn't say anything. He quickly wrote it down and continued, "Also, Mr. Martin Davis will be here on the 15th. That's not a day off, is it? I've told him about this, but Mr. Davis insisted." "Then let him be," Eric said indifferently. Alan turned a page of the document in his hand and said, "There's one more thing. It's about Speed. A week ago, there was an accident during the filming of Speed. However, there weren't any serious consequences. Only 3 people suffered different degrees of trauma. The most serious one only needed to recuperate for a month. Originally, this incident would have passed after the crew clarified it. However, 3 days ago, an entertainment newspaper called Daily Hollywood published a follow-up report on this incident and pointed the finger at you." "Me?" Eric slightly propped himself up. Alan took out a newspaper from the folder and handed it to Eric. "Take a look." Eric took it and quickly browsed through the article that Alan had marked with a red pen. This report made a lot of noise about the accident that happened on the set of Speed, and pointed the finger at Eric, who had provided the idea for the story. It said that it was Eric who had set up the story to be too thrilling, causing the accident to happen during the filming process. In the end, the report even called for Los Angeles and the Industry Association to pay attention to the incident. It also hoped that the crew of Speed could suspend filming and accept the corresponding safety investigation. "What's the result?" Eric asked in a deep voice after reading the report. This report was from 3 days ago. Since it was handed to him, there must be a follow-up. After this report, several other newspapers also reprinted this article. However, realizing that this incident was unusual, the Public Relations Department quickly followed up and it has now calmed down. Eric gently rubbed his forehead. He didn't need to think carefully to know that someone couldn't stand the loneliness and wanted to do something. It seemed that the success of Tornado had a great impact on those people. After all, if they just wanted to hype up the news, they wouldn't have turned the blame on him. "Have you found any more information?" Although Alan didn't say anything, Eric already knew the result. However, he still asked tentatively. Alan shook his head. "No, but Daily Hollywood is a newspaper under Newhouse Media." Eric recalled the information about Newhouse and said, "Send a letter to the person in charge of Newhouse Media in my name. My request isn't too much. Ask the editor-in-chief of Daily Hollywood and the reporter who wrote the report to get lost. I don't care who instigated them. Since they are willing to take the lead after receiving benefits, they should be prepared to be cannon fodder. This is also a warning to other people who want to be cannon fodder. If Newhouse refuses, then tell Firefly to stop advertising in Newhouse's newspapers and magazines until they agree." In addition to the famous Vanity Fair magazine, Newhouse Media also operated dozens of daily newspapers and corresponding magazines. These newspapers and magazines basically relied on advertising to survive. Eric didn't believe that Newhouse would abandon a big client like Firefly Pictures for an editor-in-chief. Chapter 480. As they were talking, the Jeep slowly drove into the parking lot of the hotel where the crew was staying. Eric and Alan got out of the Jeep and walked to the hotel together. Alan continued, "In this case, should we continue to track down the person behind this?" Although the possibility of finding out the truth was not very high, if they did nothing, they would be easily treated as a pushover. Therefore, after hearing Alan's words, Eric nodded and said, "Arrange for a private detective to investigate slowly, but don't spend too much effort and don't need to be too secretive. It's better to let people know that we are investigating this matter." The hotel had been booked by the crew of Jurassic Park. Eric and Alan talked as they walked, greeting acquaintances from time to time. When they came to the stairs leading upstairs, Eric said to Alan, "I'm going upstairs to take a shower. We'll talk about it during dinner. You can wait for me in the dining room." Hearing this, Alan smiled meaningfully. He handed the documents to Eric and said, "Maybe you have to eat in your room. After you finish reading these documents, you can give them to me at any time. I'll have someone send them to Los Angeles." Eric immediately understood Alan's unspoken words. He took the folder and asked, "Who's coming?" "How come I don't know?" Alan smiled and spread out his hands. "Well, I've been told not to tell anyone. I think you'd better go and see for yourself." Eric did not ask further. He turned around and quickly went upstairs and came to the door of his room. The door of the guest room was suddenly opened. Joanna Pakula, who was sitting on the sofa in the living room, raised her head in shock. After seeing Eric, the faint panic on her face did not disappear. She secretly closed the magazine on her knees and put it aside casually. Then she pretended to be calm and smiled faintly. "Eric, you're back." Eric walked to the woman's side with a smile. When he was about to sit down, he saw the magazine with a picture of a woman holding a baby on the cover. However, he didn't think too much about it as he thought that the woman was just flipping through the magazine for fun. Thus, he picked it up and threw it under the tea table in front of him. After that, he sat down beside Chow Anna and hugged her. He kissed her and asked, "Cheong, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming here? I could have picked you up." Seeing that Eric didn't notice the magazine at all, Joanna was completely relieved. She let Eric hug her and said softly, "Vicky didn't want me to tell you. She wanted to give you a surprise." "Vicky is here too. Where is she?" Eric asked as he looked around. The room was only so big, and he couldn't find Virginia. Only then did Eric look at the bedroom door. Soon, Joanna confirmed Eric's thoughts. She pointed at the bedroom and said, "She was a little tired from the flight and is still sleeping. I just woke up not long ago." It's really tiring to take such a long flight. Eric looked at his watch. It was already 6:30 in Hawaii. However, in summer, the sky didn't get dark until 7 or 8 o'clock. Therefore, he wasn't in a hurry to have dinner. Thus, he chatted with Joanna casually. "How have you been these days? Are you too tired?" After the great success of Tornado in North America, it was soon released in Europe. As the female lead, Joanna had been flying around Europe for the promotion of the movie. Joanna shook her head and smiled faintly. She said, "I'm not tired at all. Charlie arranged my schedule very well. Moreover, compared to the days when I didn't have a place to settle down, I'd rather be tired. This way, it's more fulfilling. It's much better than the days when I woke up and didn't even know what to do." Eric recalled the agent that ICM had arranged for Joanna, Charlie Walker. He had personally communicated with ICM about this matter. Of course, the agent arranged by the other party wouldn't be a mediocre person. The 5 major ticket markets in Europe should have all been released. Japan still needs more than a month. What do you plan to do next? Although the main characters of Tornado were those realistic hurricane special effects, the estimated global box office of more than $500 million could still easily push the male and female leads to the ranks of A-list celebrities. Eric guessed that Joanna would be very busy during this period. Charlie suggested that I take advantage of the popularity brought by Tornado to take on a few more commercial films. In a few years, I'll try to act in literary films to try for an Oscar. Joanna said as she looked at Eric. Eric, do you think this is okay? Eric leaned on the sofa casually. Although European and American women generally aged faster, there were always some women who were blessed by God to be immune to the erosion of time. Joanna was obviously one of them. Although she maintained a face that looked like she was 25 years old, she was actually 35 years old. Charlie Walker must have considered Joanna's age when he made such a suggestion. Of course. Although his suggestion is somewhat utilitarian, it can also maximize your status in Hollywood. Hollywood stars are destined to rely on box office sales. I will also help you keep an eye out for suitable films for you to act in. The two of them sat opposite each other on the sofa. Joanna felt that Eric's hand that was caressing her cheek seemed to have become rougher. She pulled his hand over and looked down. There were thick calluses on his palm. She asked, "How did this happen? You're the director. Don't tell me that you have to do the work yourself? Making a movie is physical labor. This time, it's more troublesome than when we were shooting Tornado." Eric smiled casually and grabbed Joanna's hand. "I'm a man. I can't be like you women who take care of your hands beautifully." They chatted casually like this. Unknowingly, the sky outside had darkened. Eric called the service desk to order dinner. Looking at the bedroom that was still closed, he stood up and said, "Why isn't Vicky awake yet? I'll go and take a look." The curtains in the bedroom were drawn, and the light was even dimmer. Eric did not turn on the lights. He walked over quietly and pulled a chair over to sit down. The petite woman was sleeping on her side, her face buried in her golden brown hair. The bedroom was very cool because of the air conditioning. Virginia was covered with a blanket. Eric watched quietly for a while before reaching out and patting Virginia's shoulder. "Vicky, it's time to get up." Virginia might have had enough sleep. She opened her eyes without too much grogginess. She smiled at Eric and stretched before asking, "What time is it? You're only back now?" "I finished work a long time ago. I didn't wake you up because you were sleeping," Eric replied. As the two of them were talking, the waiter's voice came from the living room. Eric knew that it must be dinner. He reluctantly let go of his hand and leaned over to kiss Virginia's face. "Let's have dinner first. We have plenty of time tonight." Virginia nodded and reached out her small hand. "I don't have the strength. Pull me up." Eric listened carefully. After making sure that Joanna had sent the waiter away, he pulled the petite woman up and asked teasingly, "Is it because you're hungry or something else?" Although the awkwardness and cautiousness that the three of them had when they first got together was gone, the dinner was still finished quickly. Perhaps it was because he had received special instructions, but Eric was always disturbed by messy matters in the middle of the night. Tonight, however, was surprisingly peaceful. Other than the waiter who came to deliver dinner, no one knocked on the door until the three of them finished eating. "Be good and don't break in." At the door of the bathroom, Virginia once again reminded Eric, who was sitting there reading documents. Then she pulled Joanna into the bathroom together. After locking the bathroom door, Virginia didn't react, but Joanna was like a little girl who was about to do something bad. "Vicky, is this really okay?" Virginia was still a little nervous, but she had finally made up her mind. She was just one step away, so of course, she couldn't back down easily. "Why are you so worried? I'm the one who wants a child, not you." Joanna followed Virginia to the bathtub. Watching Virginia turn on the tap and run the water, Joanna said, I just think that it's not good for you to not tell Eric." "Of course I will tell him. I'm still counting on him to pay alimony." Virginia showed a matter-of-fact look. In the sound of the running water, she poured the things she had prepared from her bag onto the sink. She found a small sewing needle and a small plastic bag from the packaging box. Then, she poked around. "Hey, this is too obvious. He'll see through it." Joanna pointed at something that was quickly poked with many holes. Virginia raised it up and looked at it under the light. She nodded with satisfaction. Then, she took out another needle and did the same thing. At the same time, she glanced at Joanna. Perhaps to suppress the anxiety in her heart, or perhaps to convince herself, she muttered, "I've been preparing for several months. I did a physical examination and took care of my body. This is the last step. Don't ruin my plan. But, I always feel that—" Joanna didn't know what to say. She gestured randomly. Virginia continued, "Some time ago, my brother urged me to get married again. You know, I don't plan to get married. In Hollywood, even if I get married, not many couples can last long. It's better to be single. In fact, I originally planned to adopt a child a few years ago." Speaking of this, Virginia raised her left hand. A rose gold ring with an exquisite pattern looked very beautiful under the light. "But since he gave me this, I gave up the idea of adoption. It's not like there aren't any men. Why should I adopt? It's better to have one myself. I've asked the doctor. With my age, it's just right to have a child now. It'll be too late in a few years." Joanna was obviously still a little worried. Looking at Virginia's insistence, she whispered, "You should discuss it with Eric." Virginia curled her lips and said, "That little bastard, what's there to discuss with him? You have to know that he's only 22 years old now. Don't be fooled by his usual old-fashioned appearance. In fact, he's still a child in his heart. Such a man often hates children. He'll definitely say to wait a few more years. Oh, I'll be old in a few more years. It'll be very dangerous to have a child again. If I don't have this face and a child, he'll definitely leave me far behind." Joanna weakly argued for Eric. "I don't think Eric is such a person. How can a man be reliable? Children are more secure. If I have a child, he'll definitely raise me. Anyway, money doesn't mean anything to him. He can afford it. I've already decided. If you dare to ruin my plan, I'll pin you down in the bathtub." In the end, Virginia put down the last small plastic bag and made a strangling gesture towards Joanna. Joanna shrank her neck and watched Virginia quickly pack the things on the sink into her bag. Then, she was pulled to the bathtub by Virginia. "Well, Joan, let's take a bath first." Eric felt that women taking a bath was troublesome. He had finished all the documents that Alan had left for him. The two women hadn't come out yet. He couldn't help but go to the bathroom door and knock gently. He asked with a smile, "Hey, are you drowning? Do you need me to give you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Don't break in, I'm warning you." Virginia's voice suddenly came from the bathroom, and it seemed to be a little panicked. "Okay, but it doesn't take so long to take a bath, right?" Eric complained a few words and turned off the bedroom light directly. The early morning sun penetrated the bedroom through the gap in the curtains. Joanna, who felt that her waist was a little sore, opened her eyes weakly. She saw another face with a small mouth slightly open, sleeping soundly. Looking at the sunlight outside the window, Joanna knew that it was very late now. Eric must have started working. Joanna sat up and took a deep breath. She couldn't help but look at Virginia on the other side. It was all because of this seductress that she had to suffer with her. However, recalling the scene last night, Joanna suddenly remembered that he didn't wear that thing, and even she turned her head and looked at the floor next to her. The small box full of something that Virginia had poked holes in was indeed lying on the floor intact. Joanna's mood immediately became complicated when she thought of the possibility of pregnancy. She couldn't help but think of Virginia's words last night. She was 5 years older than Virginia. Since she was in her 20s, Joanna had been living a somewhat homeless life. It wasn't easy for her to come to the United States, but the development of her career had been unsatisfactory. She had unknowingly wasted so many years. If she hadn't met Eric, she didn't know when her life would have stabilized. Thinking of Virginia's words last night, Joanna couldn't help but have a trace of anticipation for the child. Chapter 481. The two women came and left in a hurry. Since most of his attention was on Jurassic Park, Eric did not notice Virginia and Joanna's abnormality. On the afternoon of July 15th, a helicopter landed at the airport in the northern part of Kauai. An old man in casual clothes refused his assistant's help and jumped out of the helicopter. "Danny, have you contacted the reporter?" Martin Davis asked the assistant beside him again when he saw a man in his 30s walking towards them not far away. The man in a suit named Danny said in a low voice, "It's been arranged. The news will appear in the newspaper tomorrow." Seeing that the man not far away had come closer, Martin Davis didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly and walked forward. "Mr. Davis, welcome to Kauai," Alan greeted him and extended his hand. Martin Davis smiled and shook the man's hand. "You must be Alan Fissman. I remember your voice." Alan nodded politely. "Yes, Mr. Davis. Our crew is now stationed in Lidong, but the conditions there are not as good as the resort here. Mr. Williams asked me to book a room for you at the Westin Resort." No. I'm not here for a vacation. I'll stay in Lidong too." Martin Davis shook his head. Alan did not object and extended his hand. "If that's the case, please follow me. The car is over there." The three of them walked out of the tarmac and to the roadside. Martin Davis gestured for his assistant and bodyguard to get into another car while he followed Alan into a black Jeep. After the car started, Martin Davis said to Alan, "Eric must be on set. Can you take me to see him?" "No problem. The crew is filming at a ranch not far from here," Alan promised and said a few words to the driver. The two cars only took a few minutes to arrive at a sealed ranch. When they walked into the set, a man with a camera jumped out from not far away. He quickly aimed the camera at them and pressed the shutter frantically. Alan, who was negotiating with the guard, noticed this detail and narrowed his eyes slightly. However, he soon relaxed. Eric and Stan Winston were discussing the details of the shooting of the giraffe in front of the draft when they saw Alan walking over with a few people. "Martin Davis. Why is he here?" Stan Winston followed Eric's gaze and asked in surprise. After so many years in Hollywood, Stan Winston was very familiar with the senior management of the 7 major families. "For the movie, of course." Eric smiled and put the pencil in his ear. "Stan, shall we go and say hello?" "There's no need for that. You go ahead. I'll discuss the next location with Nickel," Stan Winston said casually. He wasn't too fond of Martin Davis. Eric nodded and walked over to Martin Davis. When he came to Martin Davis, his eyes were on the 6-meter-tall behemoth not far away. "That's a giraffe, one of the main dinosaur models designed by the digital domain for Jurassic Park. It's 20 feet tall and is one of the biggest props in the movie." Eric walked to Martin Davis and explained casually. The original plan was to use CG for this giraffe, but because of the close-range shooting and the design of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the dinosaur's movements were not complicated. In order to pursue a more realistic effect, Eric finally chose to use a model. Martin Davis looked away and smiled at Eric like they were close friends. "It's really surprising. Looking at this big guy, I suddenly think of Star Wars many years ago. Eric, I believe you will definitely create a miracle this time. Whether I can create a miracle or not, it's still up to the audience." Eric smiled and reached out to Martin Davis. "Mr. Davis, nice to meet you." "Me too, Eric. Just call me Martin." Martin Davis smiled amiably. Eric nodded, but he was not fooled by the other party's amiable appearance. The reason why Stan Winston did not want to come over and say hello was mainly because most people in Hollywood knew that Martin Davis was a very sharp and mean person. Barry Diller left Paramount because he could not stand Martin Davis's character, in addition to differences in business ideas. Barry Diller spent the last period of his time at Paramount arguing with Martin Davis. Michael Eisner, who also worked at Paramount, also said of Martin Davis, "How can there be such a person in the world?" "Okay, Martin." Eric looked at his watch and said, "I've prepared a dinner in the evening. There are still 2.5 hours before work. Maybe you can walk around. The scenery here is still very beautiful." Martin Davis waved his hand. "Eric, you can continue with your work. But I don't think you mind if I stay here, right?" "Of course not." Eric shook his head and smiled. At this moment, the assistant director not far away also made an okay gesture to Eric. After apologizing again, Eric said a few words to Alan and walked away. The shooting soon began again. Martin Davis looked at the giraffe not far away, which looked like it came to life under the manipulation of the special effects artist. He sent Alan away with a few words and whispered to his assistant, "Danny, what do you think?" "It doesn't look too special, Mr. Davis," Danny Kirk said. "These should be the most ordinary shots. I've read the original book of Jurassic Park. If I were the director, I would definitely put more energy into the Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's the selling point of the movie. Eric Williams definitely wouldn't have thought of this." "You're familiar with Jerry Bruckheimer?" "Of course, but Jerry can't tell me too much. But I know that Williams values Jerry very much. Not long after he left Paramount, Williams signed a long-term contract with him and let him personally be the producer of his movie." Martin Davis nodded and did not say anything more. But Danny Kirk could still sense that his boss must have regretted terminating the contract with Jerry Bruckheimer, just like how he regretted squeezing Barry Diller, Michael Eisner, and Jeffrey Katzenberg out of Paramount. Of these three people, one was now the CEO of Universal, one was the CEO of Disney, and the last one, Barry Diller, had left Hollywood for less than a year and already had the idea of acquiring Paramount. Danny Kirk could not help but fantasize that if the three of them had not left Paramount back then, Paramount would have been the overlord of the 7 major Hollywood companies now, and would not have fallen into the current situation where its performance was low and it was surrounded by a pack of wolves. From the bottom of his heart, Danny Kirk was not optimistic about Martin Davis's trip to Hawaii. He was not even optimistic that Martin Davis could keep Paramount. But he dared not say these words to Martin Davis anyway. In the restaurant of the hotel where the lead duo crew was stationed, Eric had already showered and changed into comfortable casual clothes. He sat opposite Martin Davis. The waiter served Hawaiian specialties from time to time, and the two chatted casually. Martin Davis did not seem to be in a hurry to tell him the purpose of his visit. Of course, Eric was not in a hurry. Anyway, the initiative was on his side. Before Martin Davis came, Eric had sent someone to investigate the situation of Paramount in detail. Paramount's parent company was originally the Gulf Western Industrial Company, which started by smelting non-ferrous metals. After the company became successful, its business became very diversified. At one time, it was involved in metallurgy, oil, electronics, entertainment, publishing, and other businesses. The famous Simmons was once an industry of the Gulf Western Industrial Company, but in the past decade or so, the Gulf Western Industrial Company had been divesting itself of its industrial business and shifting its focus to the cultural and entertainment industry. A few years ago, Martin Davis even reorganized the Gulf Western Industrial Company into Paramount Communications, which included Paramount Pictures, Paramount Television, and Simon & Schuster Publishing House. Perhaps it was because he had been forced to leave Paramount back then, but Barry Diller had never forgotten about Paramount all these years. After leaving Fox, Barry Diller took over a television sales company, QVC, which was jointly owned by Comcast and Telcom, the two cable television service providers. In a short period of time, he was doing very well. Because Comcast and Telcom, the two cable television giants of similar scale, were interested in entering the film industry, Barry Diller felt that the time was right and proposed to the two companies to acquire Paramount together. At the same time, Lei Sherdong did not give up his ambition to enter Hollywood. After failing to compete with Disney, Lei Sherdong's Viacom group also directly targeted Paramount. In addition to the two covetous parties on the surface, Eric also knew that QVC's parent company, Telcom, did not seem to be willing to share Paramount with Comcast. Instead, it had the idea of monopolizing Paramount. Simply put, in the eyes of many companies, Paramount was now a piece of fat meat that attracted the covetous of many beasts. After talking about the scenery of the Hawaiian Islands, Martin Davis finally said tentatively, "Eric, I heard that Firefly and Viacom had a lot of discord when they acquired Disney last year?" Eric nodded faintly, "Yes, but this is a very normal business competition. In the business world, there are very few things where everyone gets rich peacefully, so this is not a big deal." Martin Davis smiled like an old fox. "It's not that simple. Firefly spent at least $2 billion more in this deal. Eric really wanted to ask, aren't you good friends with Lei Shedong? Is it really appropriate to sow discord like this? If I sell Disney now for $2 billion more on the basis of last year's purchase price, I'm sure someone will still take it, Eric said confidently. So, Firefly didn't lose money in this deal. Disney is worth the price, and that's enough. Because of privatization, not much information was disclosed about Disney, but Martin Davis did not doubt Eric's words. Although Disney's film business had not shown signs of improvement, and there were no amazing works, the entire North American entertainment industry was constantly increasing in value because of the expansion of the market. Even if Disney's performance stagnated, according to the current development speed, Disney's market value would exceed $10 billion in a few years. Not to mention, under the control of Eric, and with the benefits of Pixar animation, how could Disney stagnate? Eric, let's get straight to the point. I'm sure you know why I'm here this time. Viacom wants to acquire Paramount, but I don't want to sell it. So, I think maybe we can work together. Although Disney's acquisition didn't cause you any losses, Viacom still spent a lot of money on Firefly. Don't you want to pay them back in kind? Yes, I'm sure you know why I'm here. Eric smiled. I'm sure you know why I'm here. Viacom wants to buy Paramount, but I don't want to sell it. In the business world, an eye for an eye is very unwise. I won't get involved in this mess for no reason. Eric shook his head. Although Martin Davis only mentioned Viacom's name and did not mention Barry Diller, he still knew that Martin Davis was most afraid of Barry Diller. Moreover, I haven't even straightened out Firefly's business. So, I'm sorry Martin, I really don't have the energy to cooperate with Paramount. You don't have to spend too much energy on it. Martin Davis was not in a hurry. He continued, as long as you can provide Paramount with a few promising film projects, it will be enough. Paramount will never let you suffer a loss. You can personally take charge of these projects. Martin Davis's idea was very practical. He did not want to sell Paramount, but although he was the largest shareholder of Paramount, he did not have the controlling shares. In addition, Paramount's performance was low. Once the opponent launched a hostile takeover, when the price reached a certain level, the other shareholders would definitely choose to sell their shares. At this time, the only way to turn the situation around was to show results. As long as the shareholders saw the prospect of profits, they would choose to stand on his side. Cooperating with Firefly, or rather, with Eric, was undoubtedly the fastest and most effective way. Mr. Davis, you have to know that a high-quality film project is something that can only be found by chance. Movies are like gambling. No one knows what will happen next, and no one can guarantee 100% success. Everyone was very optimistic about Spielberg's Captain Hawk, but didn't this movie fail in the end? Chapter 482. Strictly speaking, Captain Hawk was not a commercial failure and even made some profits. But this was achieved at the expense of Spielberg's personal reputation, and it was far less than the $200 million profit that the industry had originally estimated. Therefore, Captain Hawk could be said to be a great failure. Martin Davis was well aware of the situation, but he did not want Eric to use the topic of Captain Hawk to lead him elsewhere. Eric, when Sony and Panasonic acquired Columbia and Universal, didn't you cooperate with them? In that case, why can't you cooperate with Paramount? After all, this is a win-win situation. Eric smiled silently and looked at Martin Davis. Martin, you should know that the situation now is very different from a few years ago. When they cooperated with Columbia and Universal, Firefly was still quite weak and could only rely on the distribution channels of the two major film companies to improve their strength. Now, the situation was completely different. Firefly's strength and status were completely equal to the other 6 major companies. In the absence of sufficient benefits, cooperating with Paramount based on some old grudges with Viacom was tantamount to helping their competitors. Martin Davis certainly understood this, but he had already considered the relevant issues and quickly said, Eric, do you still remember the movie Condor Rebel that you cooperated with Fox? Eric nodded slightly, vaguely aware of what Martin Davis wanted to say. Paramount also has some film projects in reserve. We can imitate the cooperation model of Condor Rebel. You only need to select the next project and participate in the investment, and Paramount will do the rest. What do you think? Most Hollywood films usually had a very long project incubation period, which usually started from the time a book or script was selected by the producer to the time when the film officially started shooting. During this period, the film often went through a long period of script revision, finding investors, finding directors and actors, and so on. More than 90% of the projects were likely to be aborted during the incubation period, and less than 10% could be successfully shot. After all, compared to the investment of tens of millions of USD, the story on paper was not worth much. The project reserve that Martin Davis was talking about was the film project at this stage. Hearing this suggestion, Eric's expression changed slightly. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, "It's not impossible to consider, but Martin, you must know about the sequel of Fighting Condor Rebels. If we cooperate, I definitely won't agree to the previous conditions." Of course, everything can be discussed. Martin Davis immediately beamed. "Eric, I've already asked someone to prepare the information. I'll have someone send it to you later. There's one more thing. If there's no project that satisfies me." Eric shrugged at Martin Davis and gave him a knowing look. He was just a little curious about Paramount's copyright library. However, Paramount's most successful Forrest Gump and Mission Impossible series in the original spacetime were now in the hands of Flower Pictures, so Eric did not have much hope for Paramount's copyright library. The crew still had a regular meeting in the evening. After dinner, Eric said goodbye to Martin Davis and left the restaurant. Early the next morning, as soon as Eric got up, there was a hurried knock on the door. "Eric, take a look at this first." After Alan entered the door, he immediately handed over the thing in his hand. Eric took it and glanced at it. It was a copy of a newspaper faxed over from Los Angeles. Martin Davis goes to Hawaii for a secret meeting with Williams, major cooperation in double defense. Under the blacked-out title, there was also a photo of Martin Davis entering the set of Jurassic Park and leaving with Eric in a car. Alan followed Eric into the room and closed the door before saying, "Yesterday, I met a reporter taking pictures outside the set. I thought it was an ordinary paparazzi and didn't care. Now it seems that it was arranged by Martin Davis." In New York, after the stock market opened today, the stock price of Paramount Communications rose by 1.2% in a short time because of this news. "I've already received a lot of calls about this. Mr. Hansen called at 4 in the morning." Alan said and handed a memo to Eric. "This is the call record." Eric took the contact list and glanced at it. The senior executives of the Firefly system made a list, and the other list seemed longer. Eric raised his hand and looked at his watch. It was just 6:00 in the morning local time in Hawaii. Los Angeles was 3 hours earlier than Hawaii, and it was just time for work there. These people reacted really quickly. Fortunately, Eric didn't leak his room number to too many people. The few people who knew about it were also very clear about his situation. They didn't call before dawn, but turned to harass Alan. Otherwise, he would have been woken up long ago. Just as he was about to call Jeffrey to explain the situation, the phone in the room finally rang. "Hello, this is Eric Williams." "Jeffrey, good morning, I was just about to call you." After a brief introduction of the situation, Eric hung up the phone and handed the memo to Alan. "There's no problem with Firefly. Help me block the others. Just say that Martin Davis came to Hawaii for a vacation and happened to meet him." Alan nodded and couldn't help but ask, "Eric, are we really going to cooperate with Paramount?" "What do you mean?" Eric didn't answer immediately, but asked back. Alan had just heard Eric's explanation to Jeffrey. He thought about it and said, "I don't think it's a good choice to cooperate now. Firefly is now on equal footing with the other big six, and the annual cake is only so big. Even if it's a cooperation model like anti-condor fighting, it will definitely bring competition to itself." "You're right, but don't worry, Alan, this matter hasn't come to fruition yet. And even if it's a cooperation, it must be under the condition that Firefly may have enough benefits." Alan waved the fax in his hand. "What about this?" Let's just pretend it didn't happen. Martin Davis spreading this matter won't do us any harm. The ones who should be anxious should be Lei Shedong or Barry Diller. At this point, Eric couldn't help but smile. So, maybe it will bring some unexpected gains. No matter what, we won't lose out. Mr. Malone. Outside the QVC CEO's office, Barry Diller's assistant stood up and greeted him when he saw a meticulous middle-aged man in a neat suit walking over. John Malone nodded without changing his expression. He knocked on the door a few times, pushed the door open, and walked in. The assistant just opened his mouth, but he didn't dare to stop the big boss of QVC's parent company from communicating remotely. Barry, have you contacted Eric Williams? Barry Diller, who was sitting behind the desk and reading documents, glanced at John Malone and said, Eric's assistant just called me back and said that Martin Davis is just traveling to Hawaii, and the two of them met by chance. Coincidence? Heh, how can there be such a coincidence? John Malone laughed disdainfully. Suddenly, he recalled Barry Diller's words. So, you didn't personally speak to Williams on the phone? No, I'm not close enough for him to call me personally, Barry Diller said calmly. John Malone could tell that Barry Diller's tone was a little dispirited, and he couldn't help but say, Barry, you should pull yourself together. Back then, you were the one who proposed the acquisition of Paramount. Now, it's just a small setback. Is it really just a small setback? Barry Diller looked at John Malone coldly and said, You've been to Los Angeles at least 4 times in the past few months. I'm guessing that Martin Davis has even gotten hold of the acquisition plan that I personally drafted. John, tell me, am I right? At the end of his sentence, Barry Diller's tone had a hint of uncontrollable anger. He wasn't afraid of enemies, nor was he afraid of setbacks. He was just bitterly disappointed by the betrayal of his ally. In the past few months, Barry Diller's probing of Paramount had been blocked several times, and it seemed that Paramount had taken precautions against Barry Diller's methods in advance. After realizing the problem, Barry Diller immediately did the relevant investigation and easily discovered the truth of the matter. Although one of the parent companies, Remote Communications, had already authorized QVC to acquire Paramount, John Malone had the idea of monopolizing Paramount. Moreover, John Malone didn't hide his intentions at all. He had personally visited Martin Davis's office many times. Therefore, Barry Diller could guess the ins and outs of the matter in a short period of time. The only people who knew the details of his acquisition plan were the CEO of Comcast, Brian Roberts, and the boss of Remote Communications, John Malone. Of course, there was also Barry Diller's own team. However, he was sure that there wouldn't be any problems with his team, and John Malone had made it too obvious. When John Malone heard Barry Diller's obvious accusation, he shook his head without changing his expression. Barry, I think you must have made a mistake. I went to visit Martin Davis because of the acquisition. It's about Remote Communications' acquisition of Paramount, not QVC's acquisition of Paramount, right? John Malone was a little annoyed by Barry Diller's persistent tone. He simply said, So what if it's the truth, Barry? I've also given you a chance, but you haven't made any progress in the past few months, have you? Barry Diller was so angry at John Malone's glib words that he almost laughed out loud. If John Malone hadn't betrayed him and revealed his acquisition plan, Barry Diller could be sure that QVC would be able to acquire at least a certain percentage of Paramount's shares from the secondary market to achieve their goal of entering the board of directors. Although John Malone always looked like a meticulous gentleman, Barry Diller knew that it was just a facade. What kind of person John Malone was from his shameless words just now. It was Barry Diller's long-time wish to acquire Paramount and return to the office that he had left for a long time as the owner. However, Barry Diller didn't have the capital to do so. He could only rely on Remote Communications and Comcast's funds. The two of them looked at each other across the desk for a while. Barry Diller sighed in his heart and took the lead to compromise. John, even if Paramount and Firefly cooperate, it won't change anything. Eric Williams may be young, but he's definitely not a person who will let himself be taken advantage of. Their cooperation will at most cost us a little more. Our real enemies are Martin Davis and Summer Lei Shedong. Based on my understanding of Martin Davis, he doesn't want to sell Paramount at all. Therefore, even if you spend a year in his office, this situation won't change. The only way to take down Paramount is to acquire it by force. In this regard, Summer Lei Sherdong's style is even more unyielding. From the acquisition of Viacom in the 1980s and the acquisition of Disney last year, it can be seen that Summer Lei Sherdong is a person who dares to put all his chips on the table. At this point, Barry Diller paused and looked at John Malone with a disappointed expression. Summer Lei Sherdong is using the financing that he prepared for the acquisition of Disney last year to seek the controlling shares of the video rental giant, Blockbuster. Once he succeeds, with Blockbuster's huge cash flow, we won't have any advantage in the bidding. At the same time, Martin Davis has started to contact Williams to seek cooperation and self-protection. They're all working hard for their own goals. Look at us, what are we doing? Barry Diller slammed the desk agitatedly with a bang. And we're fighting among ourselves. Mr. Diller, what happened? Hearing the muffled sound in the office, Barry Diller's assistant was worried that the two of them would fight. He pushed the door open slightly and asked. Before Barry Diller could speak, John Malone had already turned his head and roared at the assistant with a gloomy expression, "Get out! Who let you in?" The assistant was so frightened that he shrunk his neck and glanced at Barry Diller. After receiving a signal from Barry Diller's eyes, he left with lingering fear. The office became quiet again. John Malone silently took out 2 cigars and handed one to Barry Diller. The two men lit it up silently and took a deep puff at the same time. Brian Roberts doesn't seem to be enthusiastic about acquiring Paramount. They only agreed to this acquisition because of you. Remote Communications doesn't want Comcast to take advantage of this, so I don't think I've done anything wrong. Besides, even if Remote Communications were to acquire Paramount alone, I'd still be very willing for you to be in charge. I've told many people a long time ago that I won't sign another employment contract, Barry Diller retorted in a deep voice amidst the lingering smoke. He had shares in QVC, and according to the agreement he had signed back then, he had control of QVC. He was the owner of the acquisition of Paramount in the name of QVC. However, if the parent company, Remote Communications, acquired Paramount, what did it have to do with him? Chapter 483. Back then, after Barry Diller resigned from Fox, he had received dozens of cooperation invitations in a short period of time. However, he had rejected all of them. In the end, he chose QVC not only because he was optimistic about the future of television shopping, but also because QVC had agreed to Barry Diller's conditions. Hearing Barry Diller say that he would not sign an employment contract again, John Malone only shrugged. "All right, Barry, I'll cancel the plan to acquire Paramount from Telcom and fully support you. However, how do you plan to deal with the current situation?" Barry Diller glanced at John Malone and said calmly, "When I'm about to do something, all you need to do is support me through long-distance communication." John Malone acknowledged and waited for Barry Diller to continue. However, Barry Diller only said that and then lowered his head to look at the documents in front of him. John Malone also quickly realized that Barry Diller had lost trust in him. He laughed embarrassedly and knew that he would not gain anything if he stayed any longer. He stood up and said, "In that case, I'll wait for your news." After John Malone left the meeting room, Barry Diller patiently finished reading the documents in his hands. He tapped his fingers on the table and thought for a while before pressing the call button on the phone on the table. "Jack, help me book a ticket to Hawaii." "All right, Mr. Diller." The assistant's voice quickly came from the speaker. After Barry Diller gave his instructions, he was about to end the call. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said, "Forget it. Let's go to Los Angeles first." "No problem, Mr. Diller," the assistant replied again. After pausing for a moment and hearing that Barry Diller did not continue, he asked, "Is there anything else?" "No, that's all for now." Barry Diller cut off the call and once again fell into consideration of the current situation. Although he was unwilling to admit it, Barry Diller also had a pessimistic premonition about the future of acquiring Paramount. Barry Diller had known John Malone since the early 1980s. He knew very well that John Malone was a person who did not have a stance at all. He was good at taking advantage of the situation. In other words, John Malone would not hesitate to choose whichever side he could benefit from. If it were not for Lei Sherdong and Martin Davis's series of actions that made him see that the chances of Telcom acquiring Paramount alone were slim, Barry Diller was certain that John Malone would not even appear in his office today. Barry Diller sighed in his heart and once again opened the information in front of him. This was the evaluation of the movie cooperation between Firefly and Columbia and Universal when the Japanese had acquired them. Among them, the cooperation with Universal, Basic Instinct, did not cause too much of an obstacle for Panasonic. However, it had a positive impact on the stock price of Universal's parent company, MCA. And before that, Sony issued a full acquisition offer to Columbia, and the completion of the deal happened to span the release period of the two high box office movies, Home Alone and Dark War. During this period, Columbia's market value skyrocketed from $2 billion to $5 billion. Anyone could see that these two movies played a very important role in this. When he thought of Eric, Barry Diller always felt a sense of powerlessness in his heart. He spent more than 20 years pursuing the peak of power in Hollywood, but in the end, after many twists and turns, he left that circle. He tried his best to return, but the success rate was so low that it made him feel powerless. However, that young man only used 4 years to easily obtain all of this. Moreover, from the shooting plan of Firefly's series of special effects blockbusters, he had no intention of stopping his expansion and waiting for his opponent to catch up. Firefly Pictures CEO Michael Lynn said at a recent press conference that he had no comment on the news that Paramount would cooperate with Firefly Pictures. However, according to sources, Eric Williams and Martin Davis are already negotiating the final details of the cooperation and will be announced to the public in the next few days. It is rumored that Firefly intends to cooperate with Paramount on the Star Trek movie series. Both parties intend to use the advanced CG special effects technology of Firefly's Digital Domain Special Effects Company to create an interstellar legend that surpasses Star Wars. Summer Lei Sherdong publicly announced that he would acquire Paramount in the near future and said that Viacom was determined to win this acquisition. Barry Diller, who is rumored to have quit Hollywood, suddenly appeared in Los Angeles and had lunch with Bruce White, one of the shareholders of Paramount. The purpose of the unknown QVC Media's acquisition of Paramount is obvious. Martin Davis put down the thick stack of newspapers in his hand with a worried look on his face. He had been in Kauai for more than a week. During this period, Paramount's stock price had risen by 7% because of his trip to Hawaii. Ever since he leaked the news of the cooperation between the two parties to the media, some of Paramount's shareholders, who were ready to make a move, had sided with him. The overall situation looked good. However, Martin Davis knew very well that if the cooperation between Paramount and Firefly did not come to an agreement, the stock price that had improved would definitely fall again, and the shareholders who had just sided with him would definitely lose their minds again. On Eric's side, although Martin Davis had already handed over the relevant project information to him, he had not received any response. He could see that Eric was not enthusiastic about this cooperation. Martin Davis was not like the two Helmers of Columbia. Even if he had no choice but to sell in the end, he would not do something like Columbia, which was close to drinking poison to quench his thirst. Although many people who didn't know the inside story envied Columbia's 5-film contract with Firefly Pictures, Martin Davis knew how much Columbia had paid. This could be seen from Firefly's 1991 and 1992 releases of Terminator 2 and Tornado at the same time. Firefly Pictures took half a year to complete the overseas distribution of Terminator 2 last year. It was originally a summer movie, and many European countries had to wait until the end of the year before it could be released. Although the quality of Terminator 2 was excellent, the long distribution process and the impact of piracy, as well as the weakness in the negotiation of profit sharing, reduced the profits that Firefly Pictures should have received by a large margin. But only a year later, with the integration of Columbia and Disney's overseas distribution resources, Tornado was released in North America for less than a month before it appeared on the screens of various European countries. Not only that, Tornado even got the end of the summer in the closed Japanese market, which was absolutely envied by most Hollywood movies. So far, the overseas box office of Tornado had reached $180 million, and last year's overseas box office of Terminator 2 was negligible. While he was thinking about these things, Martin Davis's assistant, Danny Kirk, hurried into the coffee shop. "Mr. Davis, something happened." Martin Davis subconsciously wanted to reprimand his assistant for losing his composure, but in the end, he suppressed the idea and just frowned slightly. Danny Kirk noticed Martin Davis's expression and quickly put away his panicked expression. He silently took a deep breath and calmly said, "It's like this. Viacom revealed the news that Lei Shedong has planned to make the first offer to the company." Martin Davis did not doubt the accuracy of Danny's information. Instead, he asked, "How much?" $5 billion US. Danny Kirk gave a number. Martin Davis sneered. "Lei Shedong wants to climb back up from where he fell?" Danny Kirk was stunned and did not know how to answer. He just stood there quietly. $5 billion US was exactly the amount of Firefly's acquisition of Disney. After the failure of the acquisition of Disney, Lei Shedong learned his lesson and reformed Viacom's equity structure again. He confirmed that there would be no internal opposition for the next acquisition. At the same time, Lei Shedong did not repay the initial financing for the acquisition of Disney to the investors. Instead, he began to negotiate with the video rental giant, Blockbuster. As a video rental company similar to retail, Blockbuster's biggest advantage was its abundant cash flow. This could provide a large amount of funds for Viacom's acquisition of Paramount. Although Paramount Pictures alone was definitely not worth $5 billion US, Viacom's acquisition target was not just Paramount Pictures, but the parent company of Paramount Pictures, Paramount Communications. Paramount Communications' main assets not only included Paramount Pictures, but also a series of assets involved in TV, publishing, music, and other fields. These assets added together were much larger than Disney's. Martin Davis did not get an answer from his assistant, but he did not pursue the matter. He signaled Danny Kirk to pay the bill and left the coffee shop in the small town of Lido. It was almost noon. Jurassic Park was still being filmed. Although Martin Davis knew that if he really went to the set, he would not be stopped outside. However, doing so would show his eagerness and leave an excuse for Williams to negotiate. However, after so long, Eric did not show any intention of cooperation. Viacom's move was imminent. Martin Davis also knew that he could not continue to waste time in Hawaii. The driver drove the car over. Danny Kirk opened the door for Martin Davis and asked, "Mr. Davis, where are we going now?" "Get someone to book a ticket back to Los Angeles. The sooner the better. We are going to the set of Jurassic Park now." "Okay, Mr. Davis." Danny Kirk agreed and closed the door for Martin Davis. He signaled the driver to drive to the destination. He drove another car and hurriedly booked a ticket. Eric and Nickel were watching the scene through the monitor. A staff member hurried over and said to Eric, "Director, Mr. Davis is here." "I see. Take him to the rest area. Also, inform the crew to have lunch in advance." Eric seemed to have expected it. He skillfully ordered, then nonchalantly discussed the scene with Nickel. 5 minutes later, Eric appeared in the temporary rest area set up by the crew and got into a tent. "Sorry, Mr. Davis, I've kept you waiting," Eric said. Martin Davis still had a smile on his face. When he heard this, he could not help but say, "It has been a long time, Eric. I may be going back soon, so I had to come." "Mr. Davis, why not continue to play in Hawaii for a while?" "Haha, if you continue to play, Paramount will become someone else's," Martin Davis said indifferently. Eric also realized that the old man's patience had been completely exhausted. He asked his assistant to bring 2 lunches before he sat down around a table with Martin Davis. He explained half-truthfully, "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis. As you know, I've been too busy recently." "It's okay," Martin Davis shook his head. He did not want to beat around the bush with Eric. He did not have the time. "Eric, I just want you to give me an accurate answer." "Now?" Eric asked. Martin Davis nodded firmly. "Now." Eric hesitated for a moment, as if he could not bear to disappoint the old man, but in the end he said, "Mr. Davis, I have read the information given to me by Paramount, but to be honest, I don't think there is a project with great potential. 65 carefully selected scripts. None of them? Martin Davis looked incredulous. Eric nodded honestly. Paramount gave him information about 65 reserved projects, but there was indeed no movie project that would be a hit in Eric's memory. In fact, this was understandable. Paramount's box office performance had not been very good throughout the 1990s. Although some of these projects did not appear in Eric's memory, they seemed to have great potential. However, without any reference in his memory, there was no way to predict the future of the movie. After all, there were too many movies that seemed to have great potential but ended up failing at the box office. What's more, Eric himself was not very interested, so he did not intend to take the risk. Seeing Eric's confident expression, Martin Davis looked a little embarrassed. Of course, he did not think that all of those projects were rubbish. Instead, he thought that Eric was probably patronizing him, or that he had his eyes on some projects and wanted to wait until Paramount gave up before Firefly snatched them up. This kind of thing had happened in Hollywood before. Chapter 484. Thinking of this possibility and thinking of Paramount's precarious situation, Martin Davis could no longer suppress his anger. He slammed his cutlery on the table and said, "Eric, I've wasted more than a week in Kauai. You can't just give me such a perfunctory answer." Eric was a little surprised at first, but then he smiled coldly and said, "Martin, are you mistaken? I'm not your subordinate. Please don't talk to me like that. Furthermore, from the very beginning, I have never promised you anything." "You..." Martin Davis stared at Eric and was about to say something, but then he suddenly thought of the current situation and said, "Okay, Eric, what do you want?" Eric shook his head gently and said, "It's not what I want, but what you want, Martin. You want to keep Paramount, but the situation now is that the other shareholders of Paramount want to sell their shares because of the company's declining performance in recent years. So, to dispel their thoughts of selling the company, what Paramount needs most is good news that can give people confidence in the company's prospects, not just cooperation in 1 or 2 movies." "Good news?" "Yes, for example, Firefly Pictures will become a shareholder of Paramount," Eric said without hiding his intentions. Hearing this, Martin Davis fell silent. Given Firefly's outstanding performance in the film industry, Martin Davis knew that this proposal would indeed be of great help to Paramount's current situation. However, on the other hand, Martin Davis was wary that his territory would be invaded by outsiders. After thinking for a moment, Martin Davis said tentatively, "Eric, if Firefly and Paramount exchange shares to form a cooperative alliance, I can agree." "Sorry, Martin. Firefly has no plans to bring in external shareholders. I mean to buy part of Paramount's shares in cash." Martin Davis almost immediately wanted to shake his head, but he suppressed the impulse and asked again, "How many shares do you plan to buy?" "Not much, 20%. Eric gave a number. Martin Davis almost cursed out loud. 20% was not much? "Eric, you know I can't agree. Besides, you now control Firefly Pictures. If you buy 20% of Paramount's shares, the Federal Trade Commission won't approve it so easily." "Martin, there's no need to be so absolute. Everything can be discussed." Eric's tone did not change at all, but Martin Davis did not want to continue the discussion. If he wanted to exchange shares with Firefly, Martin Davis would be happy to agree even if it was more than 20%. After all, Firefly Pictures, which controlled a series of high-quality assets such as Disney, Pixar, and Digital Domain, was an investment target for any capital power. But he would never agree to a cash purchase, because selling the shares would mean handing over a large part of Paramount's power to Firefly, and he wouldn't get any chips to restrain Firefly. Although he would still be the largest shareholder after selling 20% of Paramount's shares, his shares were not much different from Firefly's. If Firefly wanted to, they could even unite with other shareholders to oust him at any time. "Eric, since you are so insincere, I don't think we need to talk anymore," Martin Davis said and straightened up. Eric also looked regretful. "Then I can only say I'm sorry, Martin. I thought this would be an opportunity for Paramount." Martin Davis almost couldn't stand Eric's nonsense. He only saw an opportunity for Firefly. This young man did not have the childishness that a young man of his age should have. Instead, he was like an experienced man who wanted to take advantage of the situation. After seeing Martin Davis off, Eric returned to the tent. Alan noticed the situation and followed him in. "I thought you would cooperate with Paramount again," Alan said with a smile, remembering Martin Davis's disappointed expression when he left. Eric ate the lunch in front of him and said vaguely, "I wanted to cooperate, but unfortunately, he didn't agree to the conditions I offered." Alan could imagine that Eric must have offered an unacceptable condition. He was not very interested in it. Instead, he asked, "Eric, are there really none of Paramount's film projects that you like?" "Indeed, there is none at the level of Tornado. As for the level of Condor Rebel, there is no need to waste time at all." Alan looked surprised. Based on the box office trend of Tornado, the global box office of this movie was at least 600 million yuan. Eric's request seemed to be too high. However, he also quickly realized that if it was not a film of this level, Firefly did not need to cooperate at all. If they cooperated to develop a film of the level of Condor Rebel, it would only compete with Firefly's film of the same level. Eric didn't care about Alan's expression and continued, "The current situation of Paramount is mainly caused by Martin Davis himself. He clearly doesn't know anything about movies, but he has firmly grasped the power of Paramount. As a result, all the professionals have become his puppets. Those directors or producers who have high-quality projects in their hands often hate working with such laymen. There are not many bosses who are willing to hand over power to professional managers," Alan said with a smile and looked at Eric meaningfully. "So I still admire Murdoch very much. He was able to skillfully find a balance between decentralization and control. If he had restrained Barry Diller's hands and feet like Martin Davis, there would not be 20th Century Fox Film Company and Fox Television Network now." When Barry Diller wanted to turn the tables, Murdoch did not hesitate to part ways with him. Therefore, although the media often compares Murdoch and Lei Sherdong, Murdoch's achievements are destined to surpass Lei Sherdong's, who has a similar style to Martin Davis. After Eric said this, he looked at his assistant who was deep in thought and smiled. "Alan, you have been with me for 4 years, right? It will be 4 years in 5 months. That was when we were shooting Pretty Woman. I was your director's assistant." Later, Mr. Hansen said that he had not found a suitable person for the time being. "I did a good job, so he let me be your assistant secretary for the time being. Unknowingly, it has come to this." Alan's tone was a little sad. When he first applied for a job at Firefly, a company that had just emerged with Home Alone, he was aiming to become a director. "Have you ever thought of being a department head?" Alan remembered that Eric had been talking to him about some topics that he would not mention in the past, and he finally understood Eric's intention. Alan was of course very interested in Eric's proposal. Although the salary was high, it also limited his development. "Of course I have thought about it. Eric, do you have a suitable assistant secretary now?" "Not yet, but..." Eric seemed to think of something and smiled. "But your next one must be a woman, and she must be beautiful, classy, and outstanding." "That's not easy to find." Alan laughed and suddenly thought of a person. "But there is a very good candidate." "Forget it." Eric immediately understood who Alan was referring to. "Even if Liz agrees, she won't be able to do it for long. Her identity is there. Anyway, I won't let you go immediately. Take your time to find her." Alan nodded and was about to leave when he asked, "By the way, Mr. Davis has left. Should I continue to pay attention to Paramount?" Of course, this is a big deal for Hollywood after all. Martin Davis's empty-handed return was not unexpected. The reason why Barry Diller did not rush to Hawaii was that he had guessed this result. He was very clear about Paramount's situation. He knew that Martin Davis could never afford to pay the price of Columbia, and Eric would not be such a person. However, because Lei Sherdong had publicly announced his intention to acquire Paramount, Paramount's stock price, which had risen due to the possible cooperation with Firefly, did not fall. Instead, it continued to rise. Although Barry Diller didn't explicitly announce his intention to acquire QVC, the series of actions he made clearly indicated his intentions. While Eric was silently paying attention to the situation in Hollywood, the shooting of Jurassic Park was still going on in an orderly manner. Martin Davis, who had returned to Los Angeles, had several phone calls with Eric, but no agreement was reached. As July passed, the North American summer officially came to an end. The two blockbusters of Firefly's summer had entered the final stage. At Disney, there was a situation with Bo Wei's Nuns Go Crazy. Because Eric was optimistic about the movie, Disney increased its distribution. However, the movie was released on the same scale as Disguised Hero, but the box office in the first week was only half of Disguised Hero. When Eric heard the news, he almost thought that the movie had deviated from its original track. However, in the second week, the box office of Nuns Go Crazy did not fall as much as the executives of Firefly had feared. Instead, it rebounded because of the ferment of the word of mouth. Although the drop was only a negligible 2%, compared to the drop in the previous weeks, this result had made many people overjoyed. Although it was limited to the theme of a black comedy and would not perform well overseas, it might even surpass Disguised Hero in North America based on the box office trend shown. So far, in just one summer, Firefly Pictures had taken 10% of the total box office in North America for the year. Many media outlets had begun to predict whether Firefly would surpass Warner this year. Chapter 485. Southampton wasn't just a football club in England. It was also the name of a famous town in the northern part of New York's Long Island. Compared to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, Southampton didn't seem to be very famous. However, someone once made a statistic that the average value of the residents in this beautiful town was over $1 million. In Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, the model of the extravagant mansion of the hero, Gatsby, was near this town. In the early morning, in a mansion in the town that was connected to the White Beach, Joanna stood in front of the bathroom sink and stared blankly at the two red lines in her hand. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how long she had been in a daze. After a few knocks on the door, Virginia's surprised voice came in. Joan, come out, I'm pregnant." Joanna threw the pregnancy test kit into the trash can in a panic. She tidied up her messy hair in front of the mirror and walked out of the bathroom to open the door. At the door, Virginia was wearing pajamas. Her hair was a little messy, but her face was glowing. She held a white pregnancy test kit in her hand and said excitedly, 2 lines, finally 2 lines, look." Joanna took a look and didn't know how to react for a moment. She could only pull herself together and said, "Congratulations, Vicky, but when are you going to tell Eric?" Hearing this question, Virginia suddenly became a little listless. Although she had planned very well, she was still worried about Eric's reaction at the last moment. How about that? Joan, you test Eric's reaction for me first?" Virginia blinked and said nervously. Joanna immediately refused. "I won't do this kind of thing, otherwise Eric will think that I'm pregnant." Virginia seemed to be inspired. "Yes, that's right, Joan, you call Eric now and tell him that you're pregnant. See how he reacts. If he is angry, you can just tell him that it's a prank. I'm really a genius. Let's do it." Virginia said and reached out to pull Joanna downstairs to make the call. Chow Anna, who was dragged downstairs, was shocked. The point was that she was pregnant. "I'll dial the number for you. Remember, don't tell anyone about it." Virginia picked up the phone and was about to dial when Joanna immediately pressed Virginia's little hand. "Vicky, it should be 1 o'clock in the morning in Hawaii now, right?" "I forgot about that. He must have just fallen asleep. If he's woken up at this time, his temper will be even worse." Virginia put down the microphone and counted with her fingers. "Then let's hit him at noon. He's used to waking up at 6. Joanna was finally relieved. She shook her head firmly and said, "Also, Vicky, I will never help you with this prank. If you want to test it yourself." Virginia immediately showed a pitiful expression. "Joan, how can you be like this? We are good sisters. You won't even help me with this." "It's not like that. Joanna was a little helpless. I mean, you'll have to tell Eric sooner or later. I think, maybe the longer you hide it from him, the angrier he will be. So, you might as well tell him directly. But what if he doesn't want this child? Virginia asked worriedly. Joanna heard this and her heart tightened slightly. She subconsciously wanted to reach towards her abdomen, but she quickly suppressed this impulse and said, "If he doesn't want it, then we'll give birth to the child ourselves. It's not like we can't afford to raise it." Virginia thought for a while and slowly moved to Joanna's side. She hugged her waist as if seeking comfort. "Then it's a deal. We'll raise it together." Joanna patted Virginia comfortingly and said, "Don't be so pessimistic. Maybe he'll like it very much. It'll be strange if he likes it. Didn't I tell you a long time ago? Boys at his age hate children the most. But you'll have to face it eventually, won't you? Think about it carefully. I'll make breakfast for you." Joanna patted Virginia's back again and got up from the sofa. She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator door to block her figure. Joanna secretly glanced at Virginia, who was in a daze in the living room. She felt a little guilty. Before knowing Eric's reaction, she didn't intend to tell Virginia that she was pregnant. She was more afraid than Virginia that Eric would reject the child in her belly. In just a few minutes, Joanna had already made up her mind. If Eric's reaction was too big, she would temporarily leave the United States and secretly find a place to give birth to the child. Half an hour later, breakfast was served on the table. Virginia seemed to have adjusted her mood and sat down at the table. "I just called a private doctor. I'll go for a checkup in the morning. Sigh, no matter how that bastard reacts, I have to give birth to the little thing in my belly." Joanna served breakfast to Virginia and tried her best to make her tone as casual as possible. "When do you plan to tell him?" "At least after he finishes filming Jurassic Park, I'll find a time to tell him." Joanna also knew that this was a more suitable time. She lowered her head and ate a few mouthfuls of bread. Then, Joanna thought of a very important question. "Vicky, what about your job?" Virginia was slightly puzzled. She didn't understand why Joanna would suddenly ask this question. However, she still replied, "I've already made arrangements. You know that Fox's action film that I made a guest appearance in last time, right? They will release it at the end of the year. I don't have many scenes, so I don't have to participate in the promotion. Recently, Kapoor has been helping me negotiate a contract for a drama film. It's estimated that the filming will start next month, and it will take about 2 months. As long as I'm careful, no one will find out that I'm pregnant. The salary from these 2 films and the money I saved in the past will be enough for me to use for a long time. After filming, I can take a break for a year or 2 to take care of the child." Joanna listened to Virginia's clear plan and unknowingly felt a little envious. Because of the different environment they grew up in, Virginia began to learn to be independent from the age of 12. Regardless of whether the external environment was good or bad, Virginia was able to make her life seem orderly. On the other hand, Joanna's life was very messy and had no plan at all. Take the current situation for example. Tornado didn't bring her much income. If she didn't have a child, she could rely on the fame brought by Tornado to accumulate a sum of money in the next few years. However, once the child was born, or even if the news was exposed, it would definitely have a huge impact on her public image. If Eric rejected this child again, Joanna became more and more worried about the future. After breakfast, while Virginia was changing her clothes, Joanna picked up the phone in the living room and hurriedly dialed her agent's number. "Hello, Charlie. Didn't you say that Universal has a film that's suitable for me?" "Yes, I want to take it, but I have a few conditions." "Joan, do you think I'm that kind of narrow-minded person? As long as you think the script is suitable, I definitely won't object. But since it's a project from Universal, Eisner can't be that stingy." "How much did they pay you?" "Well, that's a pretty generous number." "When will the film start shooting?" "At the end of the month. Why are you in such a hurry?" "Oh, okay. Okay, I'm hanging up. Bye." After ending the call, Eric smiled and shrugged. He picked up the script and walked out of the room. It was already mid-August, the 6th week of filming for Jurassic Park. Although a tropical storm at the beginning of the month delayed the filming for a few days, the impact was still under control. If everything went well, Eric could even finish filming in advance before September 10th and rush to Paris to attend the opening ceremony of Euro Disneyland. As Eric was thinking about these things, just as he walked into the hotel lobby, he heard a middle-aged man's warm voice. "Hey, Eric. Good morning." "Good morning, Donald. I was in a meeting last night, so I couldn't pick you up in person. I'm really sorry." Eric hugged Donald Trump, and then looked at the shy girl standing beside the middle-aged man. Perhaps it was because she had reached puberty, but the 11-year-old Ivanka Trump had grown a lot taller in just a year. She had transformed from a little Lolita into a slender and beautiful girl. "Hey, Innie, do you recognize me?" Hearing this, the girl wanted to roll her eyes, but she still said politely like a little lady, "Hello, Eric." The three of them walked into the restaurant and ordered breakfast. After chatting for a while, Ivanka, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke for the first time. "Eric, can I not appear in the camera with the doll in my arms this time?" But, Innie, I'm already ready." Ivanka finally couldn't help but roll her eyes. "Eric, you're one of the best directors in Hollywood. Can you not do such a childish thing? I'm not a mascot in your movie." "Innie, first of all, I have to thank you for your compliment, but this is not childish at all. After Ghost of the Man and Tornado, the audience has just noticed you. If you suddenly change your style and give up the image of a little girl with a doll, it won't have that kind of gimmick effect." "A little girl with a doll? That's so boring. God, I actually agreed to do such a boring thing for $100. Eric, I'll return the $100 to you, okay?" Eric said with a serious face. "Innie, it's not just $100 now. The flight and accommodation expenses for you and your father to and from Hawaii are all provided by the crew." Ivanka looked at her father. Donald Trump nodded with a serious face. "The two of us will have to spend at least $5,000 each. If you don't do it." Faced with her unscrupulous father who was in cahoots with Eric, Ivanka was immediately defeated. The girl even began to doubt her life. Was she really born into a billionaire's family? A few hours later, Ivanka finally appeared at the scene where Dennis the programmer was trading dinosaur embryos with a huge dinosaur plushie. For this purpose, they even built a railway directly connecting downtown Paris and Disneyland. Learning the lesson of Tokyo Disneyland, this time, Disney negotiated and paid a small price to get 49% of the shares of the joint venture company of this Disneyland and the management control of the park. At the same time, in the first 5 years, Disney would collect $150 million of patent fees from the park every year. After 5 years, the patent fees would rise to $400 million per year. From these agreements, Disney would not lose out in any case, but everyone knew that if the new park was not well managed or even lost money, it was estimated that Disney would not be able to collect even the most basic patent fees. "Jeffrey, these are small things. I'll stay in a Disneyland-themed hotel. In addition, when you arrive, help me prepare a set of information about Disneyland in Europe, from the beginning of the construction to the future operation model. The more detailed, the better." Katzenberg was about to nod without thinking, but when he noticed Eric's expression, he realized that something was wrong. He asked curiously, "Eric, is there a problem?" "I don't know." Eric shook his head honestly. The information about the cooperation agreement related to Disneyland in Europe was dictated by Alan on the plane. Alan did not know the details. Without seeing more information, Eric could not know what the problem was with Disneyland in Paris. "Just take it that I'm curious. If possible, find me some information about Tokyo Disneyland." "No problem." Katzenberg did not ask any more questions. He smiled and nodded. "By the way, after the opening ceremony tomorrow, there will be a reception in Paris in the evening. I think you came directly from Hawaii, so you probably forgot about the dress. I have already asked someone to prepare it." "Thank you, Jeffrey." Eric looked at Katzenberg's jubilant look and had to cheer up. After all, history had changed a lot now. This new park was originally planned to open in April, but because of a series of events such as Firefly's acquisition of Disney, it was delayed to September. Katzenberg had been in charge of this project for half a year. Maybe there would be some turnaround. Because he had been in a tense and busy state in Hawaii, and because he had taken a flight for more than 20 hours in a row, Eric took a car to the ancient town of the Marne River on the outskirts of Paris where Disneyland was located. He settled down in the theme hotel and fell asleep directly. When he woke up, the sky was completely dark. After waking up, he saw the brightly lit theme park through the window of the theme hotel. Although the official opening would not be announced until tomorrow morning, a large number of tourists had gathered near the park at this time. The doorbell rang a few times. Eric retracted his gaze, opened the door, and saw Alan standing outside. "Eric, you're awake." "I'm finally awake." "Mr. Katzenberg just asked someone to come over and ask if you're awake." "Is there anything important?" Eric asked as he let Alan in. Alan shook his head. "No, Mr. Katzenberg is still checking the details of next year's opening in the park. He will probably be back very late." "Eric, do you want to go over?" "Forget it, Jeffrey alone is enough. I'm here to join in the fun." Eric shook his head with a smile. Shooting the movie had consumed most of his energy. At the same time, he had to control the overall situation of Firefly. Eric didn't want to take care of the company's specific operations. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to do it even if he was divided into several parts. "By the way, did you do what I told Jeffrey in the morning?" Alan nodded. "Mr. Katzenberg sent the information over in the afternoon. Do you need me to bring it over now?" "Bring it over and prepare dinner for me. I'll just watch it in my room." Chapter 487. Eric put down the document in his hand and typed a line of words on the document opened on his laptop. He inadvertently looked out of the window and found that it was already early in the morning. Due to the time difference and the fact that he had rested for the whole day yesterday, Eric did not feel sleepy all night. Moreover, the pile of information on the desk made him unable to sleep. Compared to the brief introduction on the plane to Paris by Alan, the information this time was very detailed, and it made Eric feel even more uneasy. When the Disneyland in Europe began to prepare in 1985, because of the great success of Tokyo Disneyland, the new park was almost the object of competition in Europe. The location of Paris was also determined because there were as many as 17 million potential tourists within a 2-hour drive of Paris, and as many as 300 million potential tourists who only needed 2 hours of flight. Such a huge consumer group made Disneyland and the French government extremely optimistic about the new park project. No one would consider the possibility of failure. If it were not for the memory of his previous life, Eric would have thought that the success of Disneyland in Europe was almost inevitable after reading the exciting information in his hands. Compared to the success of Tokyo Disneyland, the original project planning book estimated that the overall annual profit of various projects in Disneyland in Europe would be at least $600 million. This extremely optimistic estimate also led to the continuous expansion of the project budget during the 7 years of construction, from the initial $1 billion to an astonishing $5 billion. Not to mention the theme projects in the park, just the Disney-themed hotels alone were built. Eric did not see the specific reasons for the failure of Disneyland in Europe from the information, but he also realized that the expansion of the project cost from $1 billion to $5 billion definitely meant that there would be excess resources and huge operating and maintenance expenses. At the same time, there would be hundreds of millions of US dollars of loans that needed to be repaid on time every year. Once the number of tourists and the average consumption of tourists did not meet the original estimate, it would mean a huge loss. Disneyland was not only the pride of Disney, but it was also regarded as a symbol of American culture. Otherwise, there would not be so many European cultural figures who opposed the construction of Disneyland. Although this project was started during Michael Eisner's time, as the parent company, Firefly Pictures would definitely be blamed for the failure of the park. Although Firefly was not a listed company, Eric did not have to worry about the stock price falling. However, This kind of damage to the company's reputation would affect Firefly's overseas expansion. Capital was all about profits. If a project that the whole world was optimistic about failed, no one would invest in it the next time. After Disneyland Paris in the original spacetime, the third overseas park, Hong Kong Disneyland, was opened to the public 20 years later. At the same time, its scale was far smaller than any of the other parks. It must have been influenced by Disneyland Paris. Theme parks were a business that any major Hollywood film company attached great importance to. The profits it brought were far greater than the box office profits of the movie, and at the same time, it could improve the brand influence of the film company. Now that he was aware of the possibility of the new park failing, Eric had to take it seriously. He didn't want the influence and profits he created in the film industry to be swallowed up by the losses of Disneyland. Eric copied a survey form made according to the analysis on the information last night to a floppy disk. After he got up and washed up, he left the suite and walked to the restaurant downstairs. When he came to the restaurant, Eric was surprised to find that the whole restaurant was empty. Only a few waiters were cleaning and arranging the tables and chairs. This discovery made Eric feel a little surprised. He looked at his watch. It was already 6:15 in the morning in Paris. September was still summer, so it was not early. Eric also knew that there were many guests in the hotel. It was impossible that no one was eating breakfast. A waitress with a ponytail noticed Eric walking into the restaurant. She walked over and wanted to say something, but she quickly recognized him. "You, Mr. Williams, good morning," the waitress stuttered. She looked a little excited. She wanted to get close to Lu Zhou, but she seemed a little timid. Eric smiled at the girl, picked a seat by the window, and sat down. He then said, "Can you give me a menu for breakfast?" The waitress who followed Eric to the table seemed a little embarrassed. She explained in a low voice, "Sorry, Mr. Williams, the restaurant doesn't provide breakfast. If you want, I can go out and buy one for you." Eric frowned. The park was opening today. A large number of tourists were already living in the hotel. It was reasonable to say that the hotel should be fully prepared. Why doesn't it provide breakfast? Is it because it hasn't officially opened? Is it not prepared, or is it for other reasons? Although Eric's tone did not change, the waitress still felt that Eric was unhappy. In the face of his question, the waitress nervously pinched the corner of her uniform and lowered her head. She was speechless. "Forget it. Go and call the manager." Eric waved his hand and looked at the waitress, who turned around and left in a panic. He had a helpless expression. "I don't look like a ferocious big boss at all." A few minutes later, a middle-aged man hurriedly walked into the restaurant with the waitress just now. "Hello, Mr. Williams. I'm Jalal Robinson." Eric stood up and shook hands with the middle-aged man. He pointed to the seat opposite him and gestured for the man to sit down. He then took out a bill from his wallet and looked at the waitress's work tag. "Miss Sophia, right? Can you buy me breakfast? Anything will do." Of course, no problem." The waitress took the bill from Eric and hurriedly left the restaurant. After the waitress left, Eric turned his attention to the hotel manager opposite him. "Mr. Robinson, are you French?" "Yes, Mr. Williams. I was born in Lyon, in the east of France. However, I grew up in Paris," Jalal Robinson replied politely. Eric then realized that the other party's English had a French accent. Eric nodded, then stared into the other party's eyes and said, "You must know why I asked Sophia to call you just now." "I want to know why." Jalal Robinson faced Eric's gaze without any fear. Instead, his tone was a little unhappy. He said, "Mr. Williams, you may have to ask the management team here. I don't know who told them that we Europeans don't eat breakfast. Anyway, Mr. Patrick Schneider personally decided to cancel the hotel's breakfast service." Although the joint venture company's controlling power was in France, the management power was in Disney. Eric knew that the management team of the new park was all Americans. Patrick Schneider was the CEO of Disney in charge of operating Disney Europe. Eric even saw him at the airport yesterday. "Mr. Robinson, since this was a mistake, didn't anyone mention it? Of course. Jalal Robinson spread his hands helplessly and angrily. We raised a lot of opinions, such as the hotel's breakfast problem, the problem of the park not providing alcoholic drinks, the parking space, and so on. However, no one listened to these at all. Eric could hear that Jalal Robinson had a lot of resentment against the management team of Disney. He frowned again. After thinking about it, Eric asked again, "What about Mr. Jeffrey Katzenberg? Did you raise these problems with him?" Even if the original management team was blindly arrogant, Eric knew that Katzenberg was definitely a pragmatic person. He would not fail to notice these problems. Jalal Robinson was stunned. He shook his head and said, "No, Mr. Williams, I'm just a lobby manager. I can't talk to Mr. Katzenberg at all." Sensing Jalal Robinson's somewhat dispirited tone, Eric realized that these French employees were probably completely disappointed with the management team. Even if they could get in touch with Katzenberg, they probably no longer had any expectations for the management team of Disney. After thinking about it, Eric said to Jalal Robinson, "How about this, Mr. Robinson? Can you write a report and list the problems you know? I'll be staying here for the next few days." Of course, Jalal Robinson knew about Eric's problems. Since he had applied to be an employee of Disneyland, Jalal Robinson certainly wanted to do a good job. Therefore, he did not refuse and readily agreed. "Mr. Williams, I'll give it to you as soon as possible." "Well, if you can't find me, you can give it to my assistant. He lives next door to me." Jalal Robinson nodded. "It's Mr. Alan Fissman, right?" "I got it." The waitress soon came back with breakfast. Jalal Robinson sensibly got up and left, not disturbing Eric's breakfast. Not long after, Alan also went downstairs and came to the restaurant. Seeing the deserted situation in the restaurant, Alan felt a little surprised. At this time, Eric had finished his breakfast and was quietly reading an English newspaper in his hand. When he saw Alan come in, Eric took out the floppy disk and handed it to him. He said, "The restaurant doesn't provide breakfast. You can go out and eat anything. In addition, this floppy disk has a survey form I made last night. You have to hand it to Patrick Schneider personally. Within a week, I want to see the detailed survey results of 10,000 tourists." Alan could hear that Eric's tone was a little stiff. Although the two of them were boss and employee, they had cultivated a friendship after being together for so long. Therefore, Alan did not have any scruples. He picked up the floppy disk and put it away. He directly asked his curiosity, "Eric, what happened?" Eric shook his head. "I don't know yet, but the problem should be very serious. Just ask Patrick Schneider to do it. Then I'll do it." Alan nodded and did not ask any more questions. He turned and left the restaurant. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.